It's just like kids.
Fun,
Okay.
fun, fun. What else
Seems
do I
that
need to bloody do?
seems that we are live.
Let me check that.
Yeah. So if you're watching, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh my God, it works. We are live.
It works. I know. I mean, wow, how
I know.
crazy is that?
I was expecting, we'll go forward. Nothing.
Nope, it
Oh,
actually worked. Who would have thought?
okay. And we
Okay.
already have people complaining we're 5 minutes late.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Medi. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for becoming a member. I really appreciate that. Thank you. As the world goes up in flames around us, I will tuck myself in here for a bit to bury my head into some good history. Yeah, well, we've got some good stuff for you today. And we hope to today, Philip from Irish Medieval History and I, the creative Contessa, we are hoping to create a whole better and more interesting medieval world for you that is neither disgusting nor brown nor dirty. Well, it's a little disgusting, but no more disgusting than today. I mean, really, if you think about it. Yeah. So, Philip, how are you doing this morning?
Grand. I'm having an old look there at my Instagram. The code. I don't know what's going on with Instagram. Apologize to Instagram anyway. I think it's Instagram and TikTok this morning have been very cranky on us, haven't they?
Oh, there was notification that Instagram is not playing well with streaming apps right now. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's probably what's going on there.
But I'm live on YouTube. That's the main thing.
Yeah, right.
If all else fails, at least I'm live on YouTube. Like,
Yeah, and I'm live on Facebook. So yeah, so everyone, this is a live format. We are monitoring the chat, and we will answer your questions as we get to them. Just be aware that there is sometimes a lag, so you may ask a question and we might not see it for 5 minutes. So if you ask a question, try to make sure there's some context in it so that we know to what it's referring, because probably it's not going to come at the same time as we say something.
yeah.
Okay, so Philip, when you, what sort of myths do you hear people spouting about?
Oh, stop! Have you not been paying attention to my what was it? My shorts all bloody week with the
Oh, I
bath.
have, but I want everyone else to hear it because I know. So
Oh,
let's share some of
stop!
this, share some of
Like,
the bull crap with our friends.
we were planning, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we were planning on doing this live stream mostly on clothing and stuff. And
Right.
I've been pulled into one argument to do with batting over the other. Now, just to what was it called? What's the word I'm looking for? Just to make sure you guys know, I mostly just focus on Irish medieval history. And oh, thanks guys. Hello, good morning. But I had people that were, just completely believing that we literally. I had one guy who literally was writing in the comment section that, okay, so the water they would have used, that would have been just mud water, right? And I'm like, no,
Wait, for what?
no.
For what?
I don't know, just to kind of wash off the flakes of their skin and stuff, because the buildup of skin. Which I'm like, yeah, that's kind of why people batted, was to get the dirt and the buildup, so they're not itchy.
Flakes of skin. Oh my God.
Yeah, and so one person's reaction is like, but how did they get the water into the bucket? And I'm like, oh my God, stop!
Okay,
It's
so I
so
hope
simple,
so.
like.
So you need to keep track of this for our future sessions. Like
Mm.
they I mean, it's amazing how people think, well, if they don't have plumbing and they don't have faucets, there's no way to get water into your home, right?
Yes, that's exactly how he was replying to me, and I'm like, no,
Oh,
stop. There was a guy under him making fun of him by like elaborating even worse or still. Because at first I was like, wait, is he joking? And then I was like, oh, rolling around in mud, he must be joking. There's no way he could be real with that one. Like, and
right.
the problem is it's the mighty. No, don't get me wrong, Mighty Python. That's a comedy show. But because it becomes a meme, and if you keep saying a lie 1,000 times over, eventually it becomes true. And I think that's the
Right.
problem: is even a comedy show that was supposed to be a joke has become reality for a lot of people.
It really has. And I think so. It's funny because, the Monty Python crew, they're actually really well educated. People don't
Mm,
realize that they were very well educated. And so everything they did was satire, right?
mm,
It was to satirize either the current political situation or our misunderstanding of history. So Monty Python and the Holy Grail was a way for them to address all of this nonsense that people thought about the medieval world.
mm.
But somehow that purpose has gotten lost.
Oh, especially with memes, because God, especially the witch meme. Oh, she's a witch. Like
Right.
that joke was so funny in the film itself, but now it's become a running theme. And I even seen that this week as well. What was I? I was talking about women in an accountancy, and they were like, women wouldn't be involved with accountancy. Should they be burned as a witch? And I'm like, no, they wouldn't. What do you
What?
think they did all day when men were off fighting the wars? Who's counting the pennies? Who's making sure they're not going over the budget?
Oh my God. Women were like the primary accountant. I mean, so, guys, for a woman, women were partners with their
Mm,
husbands, right? You might think that, oh, the man runs the household. The man does not run the
mm,
household. The wife runs the household, or the daughter runs the household, or the aunt, right? It's a woman running the household. So the man can go off and do whatever it is he needs to do. So
mm,
women had to be able to keep account books. They had to be able to check that they weren't being defrauded or embezzled by their seneschal or whomever was, actually doing the work, so to
mm.
say. Yeah, that's such nonsense. And women were literate and they could write, and often it was more likely that the woman was literate and could write than the man.
Yeah.
Especially in earlier periods when men were focusing much more on fighting and less on the other aspects of life.
From what I've seen, anytime you do come across a man who's writing an account of what's happening in front of him and stuff, the writing's always terrible. Like
Right,
it's English that they're trying to make up there and then, compared to people who would be of the same circle. Like say if they're part of like a monastic center or something that have
right,
like the same kind of style of writing and the same way that they're pronouncing words and stuff. Because you can see in the medieval world how the language is developing, especially in English and stuff. But then you come across women who far better writing styles and stuff. Now, I'm not saying that's the case all over, because you can definitely
right.
see that with the those love letters that are going amongst themselves when they're trying to woo one another. I'm trying to think, because I came across, I think it was Gone Medieval. It was either last week or the previous week. We're talking about love letters amongst couples, how they were trying to woo each other. And I can't remember specifically who it was. It wasn't William Marshall. Or was it William Marshall to Isabel? I'm not sure if it was William Marshall to Isabel, where they were writing letters and they were very surprised by how educated that person was, the
Right.
man was, and how high sophisticated it was. And it definitely is a strange period, but maybe they were actually paying people to do
Well, I
that.
mean, they did have professional clerks, so
Yeah,
it's
well,
entirely possible. It could be his words, or it could be his writing, or none of those things. It could be, I want you to express these sentiments. Go, sort of
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, kind of. I don't know. I can't even elaborate on that because it's pure sausage and dog talk.
Right,
And then he says that to the clerk, and the clerk is like, what he means, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
and then the level of disappointment then when that person arrives, like Henry VIII, 40 years of age, and the poor Anna Cleves.
Oh God, that's that. Yeah, I almost feel like that should be. We should do an episode on busting myths about Henry VIII's wives. Like we could do a whole episode just on that. There is so much bullshit floating around about his wives, and there's a lot of really catty sort of
Mm,
ideas about all of them. And the reality is that they were all just women trying to survive in this
yeah.
terrible court with this
Well,
terrible
see,
terrible man.
that's the thing, is that from an Irish perspective, I really don't like Queen Elizabeth, obviously from an Irish perspective, but it's difficult because anytime somebody makes a counter argument to why I don't like Elizabeth, they're like, but you have to remember she's a woman trying to survive surrounded by enemies. And it's like, that's a difficult one to try to counter argue, is the fact that she's constantly on the desperate side of things. She's constantly a woman that's like, if I don't act like a lunatic most of the times, as in a pure sadist, they'll take advantage of me. That's her mindset
Yeah.
constantly. Um, but at the same time, as an Irishman, God, it's still difficult to like her.
Well, I mean, you can respect the leader and not agree with all of their choices. I mean,
That's
there's
very true.
there's and I mean, no one person is the same thing to all people, right? We can
Mm,
we can, from our different perspectives, we can respectively look at a great person in history and say, yeah, they were a psychotic maniac, or they were a great leader, depending on, what you think is valuable and good. So,
Mm.
and so, both of those
Yeah.
things can in fact be true.
Yeah, it is,
So today
obviously.
we are going to be focusing on armor and clothing, because there are some really
Mm.
terrible, terrible myths. And so this is sort of a kickoff, everyone, of a series. We're going to do a multi-part series because there are just so many horrifying myths that I've heard and that you've heard too, Philip, over the last, I mean,
Mm.
and you're right, Monty Python has a, a sort of a part of the blame for people's visual understanding of the medieval world. And unfortunately, Hollywood has just run away with that idea, right? I
Yeah.
mean, think about every version of Robin Hood you've seen, except for Mel Brooks' Robin Hood, actually. Every version of Robin Hood you've seen, or you've seen a still shot from since Monty Python. It's leather and dark and brown and dirt.
Mm-mm. Well, you see, this is the crazy thing, and they were talking about this this week on what was it, Gone Medieval, about going into the High Middle Ages. Is that it is a renaissance? You have so many spectacular leaders at this point. Like obviously, as I was saying earlier, you have Isabel de Clare and William Marshall in Ireland, but at the same time, over in England, we have Henry II. In what was it,
Yeah,
Germany and Italy, they have Frederick II. You have some big Renaissance players during the start of the High Middle Ages, and it really, until you get up to the Black Death, you have some magnificent stuff happening that for a very long time, as you said, there had the very Monty Python look where everything was
yeah,
dirt and dingy and covered in mud and no one was batting. That's the kind of interpretation everybody has. And so the clothing really
oh,
looks terrible. It goes completely against the what was it, Fergus Kelly's early Irish laws, and the laws that literally state that people have to be as colorful as much as
right.
possible as they're moving up the
Yeah,
ranks, not to be covered in what was it, mud and dirt, and
yeah,
their what was it, clothing falling
right,
apart with the
right.
worst stitching you'll ever see. Like, and did they even bother tightening this
Right.
side up? Because that's the
Did they
kind of
even use
hallmark.
thread? I mean, or should they just
Yeah.
hold it together with pins? I mean, yeah.
Mm,
So let's get into it. So we're going to start with armor, because yeah, the myths about medieval armor are hysterical, right? So what is what
mm.
is what is the myth you very often hear, Philip, about medieval armor, right?
Oh, well, you see, I have to come across this as from a Irish perspective first and foremost, and that's always the fact that the Irish were completely naked running into battle. The original quote itself, believe it or not, actually comes from 300 BC, from northern Italy, that talks about a tribe. What was it? The Galatian, sorry,
The Gauls. Mhm.
Gaul that move into the north of Rome, and in that they have their line formation. And many of the nobles, they do have their riveted mail and their gammonsin on and all the armor that comes with it. However, they do have a formation set where they are completely naked, and they're doing it specifically to terrify the levies on the opposite side,
Right.
the very low-ranking farmers. And so you do have a reference from northern Italy from 300 BC of these Celtic men running directly at the levies to completely terrify them. And it works. It allows them to be scared so they can quickly flank around and completely circle the Romans and
Right.
chop them up. That's the reference from 300 BC in northern Italy. Where does this reference come from in Ireland? I don't know, because what you get then is a load of sagas and what was it, Finn cycles, where it gives a little bit of a hint that this guy might be naked going into battle, but not really. And then you can, if you actually bloody read any of the sources, it continuously highlights armor over and over again. So what you have is people literally getting these little
Right.
sources of, he took his top off while he was going into battle, and then people running with it. And that's the people from the academic side. Never mind people that don't
Well,
read any of the sources, that just believe we're
Well,
naked
part of
all the
that, so this could
time.
be a linguistic problem, right? I'm a linguist, so I always think
Mm,
about, well, what does the original language say? What is the word they use? And the problem is that the word
mm,
naked often gets mistranslated from its original source. What we in the
mm,
modern world view as naked is literally like skin, right? Just wandering around
yeah.
in nothing but the skin that with which you were born, right? But that is not the medieval
Mm,
concept of naked. And
Yep.
depending on where you are, the concept of naked can absolutely change. Naked in a lot of medieval Europe for a lot of the medieval period is wearing just your underclothing, for instance. So in my
Mm,
case, that would be
yeah.
this linen smock, which by modern eyes would look like a whole bloody dress, right? So
Mm,
what is naked for a, is in the eye of the beholder, right? So if knights are coming in
yeah.
who are in like full male, and you're talking earlier medieval period, full male, with a surcoat and a helmet, right? So to them, naked would be almost anything that's less than that.
Yeah. That's so true, and you can see that with the example of the Battle of the
Right.
Stokefield, coming to the end in the 15th century, when the Fitzgeralds actually, believe it or not, invade into English territory. They were trying to crown a pretender away from Henry VII Tudor. At the time, the Tudors, their crown, they had literally just taken the crown, and so they were very shaky at
Mm,
that period. And so what the Fitzgeralds were looking to do is they quickly allegedly got a hold of Pretender and marched him into York with a large army. However, as part of Irish warfare, they had naked Kern. Um, but as you said there, they were still wearing all of their clothing and stuff on. It's just they had no armor. So when people are reading the references, they just assume, oh, these Kerns are running naked into battle and stuff. No, the reason why the English are panicking or even highlighting the stupidity of this is because they're running into the battlefield, into the formations with
right.
no armor on. That's why they're like, oh, they're naked, they're
Right.
naked, they're naked. Like, why are they naked? It's not the fact that they're actually
Yeah.
naked,
Right.
naked. We still find them with clothing. If you see all the drawings and stuff of the Battle of Stokefield, they still have all clothing on. Even the depiction of them being hung afterwards as prisoners have them with their clothing
Right.
on and stuff. And so you're completely right. It is a misunderstanding of the language of the era that when you say he went naked into battle, they mean he wasn't wearing any armor. So yeah, I fully
Right.
agree with
So,
you
yeah,
there.
Susan actually says, so could naked mean without armor? Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Susan. And
Mm,
and even I would even say that if they were just wearing a male shirt, for instance, the Karen here on horseback, right? If they were wearing just a
mm,
male shirt, 15th century knights might well view, for 15th century English, French, continental knights who are, wearing full plate, might well view that as being naked. It's
mm.
like, you're just wearing a male shirt. Are you nuts? Because
That is
that's gonna
wild.
protect you against cuts and some stabs, but it's not gonna protect you against great weapons, pole axes, mace, like you're gonna still be crushed. So yeah, that's
Mm,
that's interesting that the myth about the Irish is that they're naked. The 16th century sources say that all the time. It talks about them being naked. And the
yeah.
15th century
Will
clothing sources, late 14th, early 15th century sources, when foreigners come to Ireland, they also talk about, oh, they went about naked, but then they describe all these clothes they're wearing. So,
it is confusing. The thing is the also people, even people who come abroad, they don't quite understand Irish
mm,
warfare at the time. Like the depiction that you have up there is a Ridera.
right,
However, what was it? Ridera, Irish knights, as it's
right,
translated to, had actually multiple types of armor, and that's actually the armor they would have worn for cattle raiding. So when you had Irish nobles, both the kind of Anglo-Irish areas and also from the Gaelic areas, they would have had armor that was adjusted for going out there and stealing each other's cattle and stuff, which had to be much more lighter than the 15th century armor we see in France and England, but also had to be adjusted for the bogginess, the the trees that caused them to go into loose formations and stuff. And so this armor here is actually adjusted. So a lot of this stuff, it would have been taken from France and England and then readjusted again to the type of warfare that's in Ireland, and also the cattle raiding is going on, because as you can see here, this guy's he's not really tied onto his horse. Like he can easily
right.
jump on
Yeah,
and
it's
off
it's
of
not
his
he's got
horse.
no stir. He's basically has
Compared
a saddle pad, right? He doesn't It's not even a real
Yeah,
saddle. Yeah,
yeah, and that's on purpose. That's so he can jump on and off of his horse very,
right,
very quickly if he needs to get involved with the cattle raiding itself. Because his main job is to get in there, cause the panic, cause whatever he needs to get done, and then quickly gallop off again with all the cattle. And it helps if you're involved with very quick, very sudden cattle raiding. As a noble who needs to get involved with his local war band to quickly get off the horse, like right, something's going wrong. There's a a cow
Right.
was tied to a
Right.
tree or something weird like that, he can quickly get off, get the thing up and going, jump on the horse again, and then gallop off. Be seen as a real leader. Get fully involved, get
Right.
stuck in. Compared to, but if you read, for example, Garrod Fitzgerald's book, The Geraldines in the Medieval Ireland, The Making of the Myth, it talks about the fact that when Henry VII, during the last periods of the Wars of the Roses, when he's invading into Fitzgerald territory, it marks that a great rich spoil, such as bedding and goodings, hangings, so rich of wardrobe, can be found in his furniture. And then it goes on and describes the armor that's in there as well. It talks about armor from both Italy and from the Burgundies area as well, which highlights the fact that the Fitzgeralds not only had armor, which we can also see with effigies all over Ireland as well. So they not only had armor for cattle raiding, but they also had armor for fighting in France and England for the period during the 100 Years' War, when they were attaching themselves onto the English. And also much later on as well, where they're in the Wars of the Roses, they're allied to the Yorkists and they're fighting against the Lancastrians. So the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers, they have different types of armors for tournaments on the main continent, for fighting in the 100 Years' War and the Wars of the Roses. But they also have this sort of armor as well for cattle raiding around Ireland. There's something as interesting as well you were saying last week, Rachel. I was just wondering if you did any more research on that one with the picture of the effigies. You were highlighting the fact that it's also very arcane, which is very strange given that the paintings have them in modern clothing.
So yeah, this is exactly, so here you have, this is actually the one of the famous Fitzgerald effigies. This is well, sort of, that's Margaret Fitzgerald, and that's her husband, Piers Butler. I forget what's, right. So this actually, you look at this, if I were to look at this just casually, as I did when I first saw it, and guess its date, I would have handily put it in the 1430s. Absolutely. But no, this effigy dates from the 1540s. So there seems to have been, and all the effigies, all the effigies of the great families of Ireland in the 16th century, everyone that I've ever seen anyway. However many that may be, there's probably not many left actually. But anyway, all of the ones I've ever seen from the 16th century all look like this, including and up to the 1590s. So my theory is that they're not still dressing like this. This is just supposed to tie them back to a greater time in Irish history. The 15th century was the Gaelic resurgence, right? So they're trying to tie themselves back to this more glorious past and to look like the nobility who dominated in that era, because that's when England kind of had like the least influence over this multiple 100-year period, is the 15th century. So that's my theory, is they're trying to tie themselves with that more glorious, not too distant past. And it just became the style of effigy that was just accepted, that everyone, this was the kind of effigy you're going to have. You're all going to look the same. You're all going to look like great 15th century Irish chieftains or ladies or whatever.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that one, because that's the period which is ran by Seamus, the White Earl Butler, and also you have James the Usurper Fitzgerald as well, and they're both seen as proper Gaelic men of the time. It's the peak of the the Resurgence, when we're cut. England is pinned down and getting hammered by the French with Joan of Arc. The Irish, who were first off led by Art MacMurrough Kavanagh, had won big, glorious battles against the English, huge sieges, and they also marched into Dublin and got the Black Rent, which means that Dublin gave them tribute, which in their mind, that's the King of England giving them tribute, not the other way around, which must have been a huge deal for them. Art MacMurrough Kavanagh.
Yeah. I just need to find him. I've got his picture in here. It's under clothing, under colors. I just need to figure out where it is. Unfortunately, with the way this displays, I can't, no, it's not going to let me. I can't easily see that. I don't get to see thumbnails, so I don't know. It's somewhere in there. Anyway, no, it's like, it totally makes sense to me that this is not the way people were actually dressing in the 16th century. Not the actual armor necessarily, could be, but not necessarily, of the 16th century, that they're really trying to tie themselves back. So, art is dangerous. You can't just take it at face value. You have to understand its context. Yeah.
Oh, it's so true. Especially when you have the Irish who constantly romanticize the glorious old days and the whole kind of clan system, so on and so forth. Like, and the whole, they have the assemblies and they, speak in the old
Right,
language and stuff. It definitely is a group of people that you need to really review from the context of how they're thinking, and you need constantly kind of review. Okay, am I do I have the right interpretation, the right view of this, or do I need to, take a step back and
right.
reassess? Okay, is this how the Irish are
Right.
viewing the
Yeah,
world?
exactly. Rando, thank you for the compliment, and also thank you for being aware of the potential creepiness of the comment. Yeah, we do get some real creeps in our chat, don't we, Philip?
Oh yeah, from here and there.
And I just like to say hello to everyone who's just joined. I am the creative Contessa. This is my good friend Philip from Irish Medieval History. We are the medievalists in exile in East Asia, and we're here to talk about
I know,
medieval
right?
myths, busting medieval myths in the most fun way possible. So we're currently talking about the myths
Mm,
of armor. So don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out, if you're on my channel, check out Philip's channel, Irish Medieval History. And if you're on Philip's channel, check
mm.
out the Creative Contessa. We have different thrusts and we complement each other really well.
Oh, definitely. So yeah, talking about myths, all right. It definitely is the whole arcaneness of Ireland is constantly coming back, where people believe that both Ireland and Scotland are constantly far
Right,
behind. When I don't believe that's the case whatsoever. Like I think the Irish are constantly modernizing the warfare and constantly their armor and stuff. Like this one here is actually from the 13th century with the arrival of the Normans. And it's funny because anytime you see depictions of the Normans fighting the Irish, you always have this view of pretty much Irish and kind of Viking
right,
clothing, more
right.
like, where they have the round shield and they have the sword. When that's not actually the case whatsoever. By the time the Normans come in, that's pretty
Yep,
much how the Irish and the Scottish are dressing at the time. You can see that this one is an effigy, and it's showing the heater shield that both the Normans have with them coming into Ireland. You can see the sword
right.
at the side. You can see the gam. This
He
one has
does.
a gambeson. There's other effigies, and they have the
Yep,
riveted mail. The majority of the effigies that you can find, if you really want to study all of them, is found actually in Iona. There's tons of effigies from the 13th century, and because we have the movement of the Gallo Glass war bands, who, mercenary war bands are being both hired in Scotland and in Ireland at
right.
the time. Iona is absolutely, and the fact that you have all these effigies all over Iona is absolutely magnificent. That we can see that movement of the Gaelic world and actually see that the Gaelic world in both Scotland and Ireland is not
No,
backwards at
not
the
at all.
time. Like, this is pretty much solidly the
Yeah.
same, almost the
I,
exact same kit that you
if
see
if
with the
you hadn't
Normans.
sent me that and labeled it as 13th century Irish,
Mhm.
I wouldn't have been able to say that's definitely 13th century Irish, right? It's,
Mm,
the only thing he's lacking is a magnificent surcoat, right? That
yeah.
if he were wearing a beautiful silk, obviously carved surcoat, then I would have said, yeah, he's French.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
yeah.
It's, yeah, no, there's it's I
Mm,
think I think, there is always nationalist there's often a nationalist prejudice in the way people interpret
yeah.
history. And so everyone wants to think, well, my people were the best and the most advanced.
Yeah.
Being an American, I have the benefit of having lots of people in my past. So to me, all of Europe is my
Mm,
ancestors, literally. So, I don't have
yeah.
a particular tie to any one nationality. So that actually gives me a more broad mindset, I think, naturally than, someone who's
Mm,
actually German or French. They want to think that
yeah.
we were the best in the past, and these other groups were definitely not.
Like, don't get me wrong, I love the banter of it. Like, I love going to a sports game and stuff and saying, "Oh yeah, I hope for Ireland wins this one." But sometimes it can get a bit wild, all right, when you're literally looking at Germany and saying, "Oh yeah, Germany's great and all, but we're better," and
Right.
actually believing we're better. Getting to the point where it's
It,
like, okay, you need to take a step back here. Every society, every civilization has its negatives and positives, and when you see something that's very strange. Like, why are they doing this? It's because they have somebody who's trying to eat them, or it's there's a
right.
cultural reason behind that. Like, I'm trying to think of any good good excuse. What was it? A good example right now. But bloody hell, with the world being so crazy on fire right now, it's bloody
Yeah,
hard to find a good example.
it is. Well, it's sort of like little dog syndrome, right? Like the
Mm,
little dogs have to be mean and vicious and loud because
mm,
that's their only advantage, right? They don't have the advantage of size. Whereas big dogs can afford to be generous and gentle and
mm.
calm because they can just sit on a little dog, right? So
Yeah.
it's
That's a good example. Definitely a very, very good example. Good morning,
um,
everyone.
Yeah, good morning, Devondra. Thank you for joining us this morning. And thank you for all of you who are out there in Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or wherever you are. Unfortunately, we only have eyes, at least I only have eyes on the YouTube chat. I apologize
Mm,
for that, but I can't seem to get to the Facebook live stream chat. So I apologize for that. So
yeah.
one of the other myths that, of course, really crops up often with medieval armor in general is there's this weird idea that armor, especially by the time you're getting to the full plate armor of the late 14th and 15th century, that knights had to be hoisted onto their horseback by crane,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Especially when you're doing a Henry
I'm
Day.
assuming you've heard that. You've heard that as well.
Yeah, yeah, I was about to say that. All right, I think we were talking about this like 2 or 3 weeks ago about Henry VIII. Like Henry VIII, he pops up over and over again, but Henry VIII is also a big meme generator as well. Like
He was,
even
yeah,
to the fact
really.
that people believe that. And I was talking about this, what was it, 2 weeks ago as well? How people believe that because of the portraits and the pictures, that Henry VIII was always very, very fat, which it doesn't help, as you can see here with the armor that people get to see.
I thought I included a picture of him at his most obese, but maybe I didn't. I
Yeah.
guess I didn't. No, I
It's
didn't, because that's definitely not Henry VIII.
yeah,
Yeah,
because the thing about Henry VIII is that most people don't realize that, especially in the early, what was it, the late 15th century and stuff, is that he was actually referred to as the Summer King. Like he didn't spend his entire life being the tyrant. In
right.
fact, even in Ireland, he was actually very much, and this is going to annoy a lot of Irish people. He was actually loved in Ireland all the way up to, what was it, 1536? What was it? Yeah,
Reformation,
1534.
basically, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When this had to burn, basically.
Right.
Yeah, I think burning this down and a lot of people with it, I think that's going to annoy a lot of Irish, all right.
Well,
But weirdly enough, he was actually referred to as the Summer King, not just in Ireland, but over in England as well. Like he was seen as a huge relief after his father had passed away, Henry VII, who was actually referred to as the Winter King.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's because he was so strict with the money.
He was so
Um,
miserly. He was so
yeah,
miserly. I mean, the way Henry VII made Catherine of Aragon almost starve, and I'm not exaggerating, folks.
oh,
Like,
it was horrible.
yeah, yeah, I mean, he was horrible because her husband dies, right? Prince Arthur dies, and so she's a widow and she's in England and she's relying on on an allowance from Henry,
Mm,
her father-in-law, and he refuses to give it to her. He says your father should be giving you money. And her father, who's also an asshole, by the way, Ferdinand of Isabel and Ferdinand, was a total piece of shit.
really?
Oh yeah, he was
I did not know that.
he was no, because Isabella was dead at that point, and so he
Oh,
decided he didn't have any financial responsibility for his daughter either. And so here's poor Catherine, like starving to death, wearing literally the chronicles say she's wearing threadbare clothing
yeah,
because
yeah,
she can't get an allowance. And it's really Henry who actually saves her. Like
yeah. I was thinking that.
he saves her. And
Yeah.
so his reign starts off with all this, the beautiful Spanish princess whom he
Mm,
saved, right? It's like a fairy tale. The dark days are done, the golden days are here. Look at our 6'2", slender, athletic, refined. He's a philosopher. He writes poetry, he writes songs, he dances, he's masterful at jousting, he's masterful at foot combat, he's good at wrestling, right? He is like the full package, baby. And
mm,
so yeah, it starts off with all this amazing goodwill. He is the first real Renaissance prince of England, really. I mean, Richard II kind of was actually. He doesn't get enough credit for that, but it's Henry. He comes in with so much goodwill, and he just manages to squander it all
yeah.
so quickly.
Ah, it's wild because, like, even from an Irish perspective, like that all kicks off with O'Donnell. He's making pilgrimage to Rome, and while he's returning back, both going to Rome and coming back, he actually goes to Henry VIII's court during the period of the Summer King and all that stuff, and they absolutely have an absolute amazing time. Here you have, and O'Donnell is a Gaelic chieftain, like he
Right.
is. According to, for so long, the Gaelic and the Anglo-Irish are savages, they're backwards. Now you see the Summer King laughing and joking with a very civilized Gaelic man who's just returned from his pilgrimage from Rome, dressed in all, as we can see there with the Waterford finds, dressed in all his gilt,
Oh yeah.
his all fine clothing. Some of it must have been, done up with gold
Right.
embroidery and stuff, very much
Yeah.
done out. And then off returning back to the north of Ireland. And this is like a very civilized time compared to everything that happens after 1534, where once again the Irish are considered savages, constantly running around naked, backwards people living out in the forests,
Yeah.
not living in the cities. Complete change after 1534. And we forget that. Well, we don't just forget that, it's completely
Yeah,
forgotten
it is.
about.
No, I mean, for those of you should check out our talk on medieval Irish textiles, because it's going to rock your world about medieval Ireland and how richly clothed people were, how colorfully clothed they were, how adorned they were based on the archaeology. Because yeah, everyone has forgotten that. By the late 16th century, everyone's wearing, apparently, according to the sources, of the time, where everyone's wearing wool and it's threadbare, and so yeah, that's just not true. But back to armor. So the myth of the armor being so heavy that people had to be craned actually ties back to Henry VIII, which is why we got on the topic on that tangent. Because he did after he suffered that injury, and he became like the first obese monarch of Europe, as far as I can tell. First post-Roman obese monarch. He had to be hoisted. He did have to be hoisted onto his horse, not because his armor was too heavy, but because he could barely walk. So it had nothing to do with the weight of his armor. And so I've provided to actually put the proof in the pudding. I personally have many friends and a condottiero who does harness fighting in full 15th century harness. Harness is, by the way, everyone, the medieval word for armor. They didn't call it armor. It was referred to in English as harness, and you could have different kinds of harness, right? Plate harness is what most people think of, which is, what you're seeing here. And so, there's so much extant armor that we can actually know for most of Europe how much armor weighed. And so, battlefield armor was somewhere between 40 and 60 pounds. And, this suit that you see here, that may or may not have included the sort of layers. What most people don't realize is that even with plate armor, you still need mail to protect the parts that you can't have plates, right? In your armpits, in your groin, the backs of your legs, the bend of your arm here, right? So all the bendy places need mail, basically. And that's the kind of protection. So you would have that in addition to, oh crap, I forgot to plug in my laptop.
Oh, the joys.
No, don't die. It's here. I set it up, and then please work. Yes. Okay, good.
You did.
Whew, saved.
I know, right?
You would probably have, another 10 pounds, 10, 20 pounds of mail. And that does seem like a lot, but everyone, my condottiero, some of you know, was active duty in the U.S. military for 20 plus years, and he used to go ruck marching with 160 pounds on his back, not distributed over his body, right? So there's a difference in physics, mechanics, right, between a large amount of weight in one awkward part of your body, or that weight completely distributed over every limb, over every muscle group. It's not the same thing at all as far as impact on your body is.
Oh, I definitely would agree, because I did the exact same thing for 4 years as well while I was in the military. I think most military lads can tell you that, but you get used to it as well. It's true. After a while, once you've had that weight on for a long time, your body will develop around that for both good and bad. Because I still, most army lads even today will tell you about the splinters in their ankles. Their calves, and also the bloody shoulders getting wrecked up. Like I still hunch and everything from it. Like, so your body does adapt to it, and then when you're not wearing the weight because you have a week off or so, you're like, okay, where's my bag? Like there's something strange here. Like it gets
Yeah, it
weird,
feels so light and odd. How can I move so
Yeah.
quickly? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other thing is that
You're-
we actually have primary sources from the later Middle Ages, especially we have fighting manuals, actual medieval combat manuals, and
Mm,
many people don't know that. They actually, it's a martial arts manual, and they're fully illustrated, and they show all these different holds. And there's of course always a theoretical section. And Busiko is one of these sources that's really more commonly known amongst the harness fighting community. And he
mm,
not only talks about the things you should be able to do in armor, he provides a list of exercises to train yourself in harness. And we're talking, these are the things he says you should be able to do in full harness, including mail, all the layers,
mm,
and medieval shoes, by the way, not modern shoes, not modern shoes with, Nike soles on them. You should be able to run, you should be able to jump, you should be able to dodge, you should be able to climb a ladder. And when he says climb a ladder, so Philip, imagine a ladder, right? It's leaning against the wall. Okay.
yeah,
You have the
yeah,
top part. That's the part normal people would take, but he wants his man at arms to be able to climb the underside with just his
yeah. Oh,
arms.
right.
With just
Yeah.
his arms. Um,
Yeah, that's gonna
oh
build the
boy, is
muscle, all
it?
right. Like
Oh
definitely bigger
boy,
than my
is
twigs.
it?
Yeah.
You should be able to climb a wall. You should be able to mount a
Yeah.
horse. And no, not just mount a horse. You should be able to somersault onto the horse. You should be able to vault
Mm,
on, not somersault, because that implies turning. You should be able to vault onto the horse, like run and jump and get on the horse in harness. And
mm.
you should be able to somersault also, but not onto a horse. But he says, because he's writing in the late 14th century, he says you should be able to somersault without your bassinet, without your bassinet helmet. So, because apparently, with the
Okay.
point on that, trying to somersault, you're probably just going to peg your head into the ground. Yeah, but he says you should be able to somersault in full harness. And the most shocking, you should be able to stand up from laying down flat on your back, right? Just completely.
Okay.
So these are the things that medieval knights could in fact do in this full harness. If you can do all that, you don't need a crane,
Yeah, they were definitely the SAS of the era, the
right?
knights were. I can see why they switched from retinue to regiments for sure.
Right.
Like the cheap level of maintenance for these lads must have been something else. Look, I can do backflips off a ladder. Why aren't I being paid more
Right.
money?
But can you do it in harness?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny how people have this, and of course I think people look at, plate armor like this, and they just see heavy metal, right? They don't think about
Mm,
how actually light each of those pieces are, right? They're not big, then I think that the problem is costume armor, or, like the cheap armor that was made in the Victorian
yeah.
era, or now that's just sort of a statue armor, is of course thick and heavy and awkward.
I was thinking that I seen my brother went up to Clontarf Hotel, which is a castle. It's one of the oldest castles in Ireland. And outside, just as you're going in, it's one of those traditional, 19th century armors where the armor's proper thick and the helmet's like to the side and stuff. And my brother sent it to me, and I was like, I hope Rachel doesn't see that. I hope Rachel. Like I'd love for you to go to Clontarf Hotel, but I hope as you're going in, you manage to miss this armor because oh no, it's something else. Like, and it's the traditional
Right.
Victorian interpretation of armor, bulky and just all of it just not fitting in place and random bits and bobs, and you're like, oh
No, yeah.
no, what
So
is
so you
this
wanna hear
like?
something crazy? Hotels here in Seoul
Go
also
on.
have Victorian suits of armor as decoration.
Oh, I
This
don't know.
is definitely not part of your history. Why is there a cheap looking suit of armor? And get this, five-star hotels that cost, like $500 a
Mm.
night have these cheap Victorian suits of armor.
They always, because that's the same thing with Clontarf Hotel in Ireland, of all places. Like you would think they'd be able to get a hold of what was it called, Tudor armor or something to put outside of Clontarf Hotel. No, we're going to shove a Victorian armor in there. And don't get me wrong, like Victorian armor, it must cost a lot of money now since they're about 200 quid a pop. Sorry, 200
Right.
years a pop. But at the same time,
Why
like
are we doing
it's
this?
so ugly. I'm sorry. Like I'm sorry for people who are mad into Victorian history, like, but Victorian armor is so ugly because
It's
I
because
don't
they
know,
didn't,
it's
right?
a
It's like the
queer
same thing they
interpretation.
did with their versions of medieval clothes, because they didn't actually wear them.
Yeah.
for real.
Mm,
They had no idea. I mean, it was
yeah.
a lost art. Literally, armor making, medieval harness making was a lost art until reenactors, many of them in the SCA, by the way,
Yeah.
decided to start making armor for real to actually use for protective
Mm,
purposes. And that's the other thing people don't realize is
yeah.
that it's tailored, for the most part. I mean, there are mass produced pieces in the Middle Ages. Don't get me wrong. There's this mass production, happening in Milan and Italy, armor for export in the 15th century. But for especially these knights we're talking about, most of it is custom made, or even when they get it, then their local armor will fit it to their body, right? They're not just going to have a
Mm,
pair of greaves that's a little too short or a little too long or a little too tight or a little too loose, right? They're going to have it adjusted. And just like clothing, you can in fact adjust armor, just like you can adjust, jewelry. And I think that's something people don't.
because
I'm pretty certain that no one has that idea that, like clothes that you can let in or take out, you can do the same for armor. And they did. And you can see this if you go to armories and look closely, you'll start seeing like little patches of metal that have been added on and that have been welded on or riveted on, or places where cuts have been made and things have been made shorter. So, you're not just wearing this whatever, junk metal that's floating around your body and causing uncomfortable blisters or something.
mm. For the what was it called, armor being passed down, I don't really believe in that when it comes down to Irish warfare, just because warfare from the 15th, 16th, and 17th, the warfare changes so quickly. So it's like even per what was it, every 5 years or so, the armor has to be, in my interpretation, Rachel probably correct me on this one, is that the armor of the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers had to change at least every 5 years or so to keep up with the warfare in France, England, and their own cattle raiding warfare in what was it, Ireland. So I definitely would think that they were changing their armor at least every 5 years or so. And the Fitzgeralds, if you go through the book, the Geraldines and Medieval Ireland, Making of the Myth, they had the financial to do that, in my opinion. And they had different, they had multiple
Right.
suits of armor, which is recorded in the book as well from Henry VII when he is attacking Minute Castle and stuff, and is raiding into the castle, finding all this armor
Right.
around and stuff. There's just one question I do have for you, Rachel. So we're talking about the likes of the
Right.
Fitzgeralds and stuff being sized up. If they're importing their armor from Italy and also from Burgundy and various other spots around Germany and stuff, how is that working? Are they writing a
Yeah,
letter
so
with their
I would assume that
sizes or?
they're taking measurements, right? They could even have a tailor. They could
Okay.
either have their local armor, because they're going to have local armors, right? It's not just, you don't just, yeah, you're going to still have your local armors. So either they're going to have a local armor take the appropriate measurements, or they're going to have a tailor do that. And if I'm going to assume it was taken the same way that measurements were taken for medieval clothing. So they would actually either mark a stick, right? They would actually have a measuring
Mm,
stick, and they would actually mark on the stick where the point to which each of the respective measurements came in, it would be labeled. Or they actually had paper measuring tapes or vellum measuring tapes, where it
okay.
was just like a long strip of paper or vellum, and they would, wrap it around the respective part and then mark right on that tape the measurements. So I'm assuming that that is
Mm,
probably how it was done. I don't have proof positive of that. That would be really interesting if we could find like an armorer's shop in Italy and find the records and find like a chest of measurement and tapes, right? That would be really cool. But I'm going to assume that's probably how it went. You're definitely going to send measurements. It's just that even with
yeah.
measurements, there's still going to need to be adjustments. There will have to be. Anyone who's had harness made in the modern world knows that no matter how much you make casts of your body parts, send measurements, when it comes to making the real thing, it's going to need to be adjusted on the body. So it has to be local armorers who are doing that. It would be, there's a
Yeah.
chance it could just magically all happen to fit perfectly, but I doubt it.
Mm. Yeah, that makes more sense to me, to be quite honest with you, because if you take the example for Thomas Fitzgerald, who had cattle raiding for his campaigns in Ireland, but then suddenly he's back in England again for the Wars of the Roses, going on and off. And then suddenly, is it around 1490 with the Battle of Stokefield, or is it around 1486? It's around that period where
Hmm.
he's suddenly back in England again. for him, and the thing is, everybody makes note of the fact that his armor isn't arcane. It's not backwards. It's up to the standard of
Right.
the English. That would highlight the fact that he's constantly modernizing his armor. Of course, I don't think he got his armor from Italy or Germany or Burgundy. I think he got his armor from England, to be quite honest with you. But the fact that he has cattle raiding armor, and then the Battle of Stokefield happens, and he suddenly has perfect English armor, so shows that there is some kind of interaction going on where the Fitzgeralds are writing to people to get those what was it called, sizes fitted perfectly. I think that's what's going on, to be quite honest with you. So I do think you're bang
Right.
on
That
right.
makes sense.
Do you know anybody that you can buy armor off?
Oh
Just a
yeah, I mean, I
comment
know
in the
lots. I
comment
have
section.
lots
I
of friends
don't
who make
know.
armor.
Oh, well, there you go.
What country are you in? It matters.
Yeah.
So yeah, you there. So if you look up, if you do a Google search for medieval armor maker, then you will get a bunch of hits. It depends on what kind of armor you want. Do you want like super authentic, combat ready? Do you want something that's just going to be pretty for costume pieces? Do you want it for fantasy LARPing? Right? Like there's all these. There's especially because of the prevalence of fantasy LARPing these days. There's a lot of fantasy LARP armor out there that's really just meant to be decorative. It's not meant to actually protect you. So you need to make certain, if you want replica medieval harness, like that it's actually on historical objects, on documentary evidence, and that it's useful, you want to make sure you're working with an armor who can in fact produce um, armor of that grade, harness of that grade. In the US, there's a bunch of very reputable armor makers. I'm less familiar with the European armor makers because I haven't really played in that uh, arena for a while, shall we say. Um,
Yeah. And I haven't been home since what, 2019, so the whole game
Yeah,
has
I'm not.
completely changed now
COVID
after
COVID
both the
changed so
Ukrainian
much,
war.
so I'm not certain what the I
Yeah.
actually so wait, no, actually I do know a lot of people in Europe are now getting their harness from, well, Ukraine, from armors in the Ukraine, yeah, and Poland.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
about to say that because there's a load of blacksmiths and stuff that I knew who are gone now because of the Ukrainian war. And also, as you said there, the coronavirus came in. So to be honest with you, there's a blacksmith in Ireland now, and I don't even know what he does. He's famous on YouTube and stuff. Never met him, and he actually works where I was working between 2015 to 2019. And I don't know who this guy is. And he's not the only one. There's loads of people that since I moved to Japan has suddenly taken the limelight in all those spots, from woodwork to metalwork and stuff. I don't know
Right.
who any of these
Out
people
of
are.
out out of
Yeah,
out of the region
strange,
too
like,
long. So yeah, if you're interested in
yeah.
getting into actual proper medieval combat, then you want to look up, if you want to do 14th or 15th century into early 16th century, look up harness fighting. That is the term you want to look
Hmm.
for. I'm not certain how accurate or realistic combat is from the earlier reenactment groups because I don't really play in that period of living history. So I don't know how realistic or historically based, for example, in the Norse reenactment communities. I don't know if their combat is actual martial art or if it's for show or if it's choreographed. Do you because you played in the earlier periods? What can you say about that?
I've done pretty much a good chunk of it. I think from a tactical perspective, I think it's not perfect, but it's somewhat sound. The problem is it's constantly health and safety has got to be the
Mm,
biggest problem of how do you do these big, large scale battles, but not everybody getting their eyes poked out because in Europe, especially for the events happening in both Denmark and the Battle of the Boyne. The problem is that if you want full contact where it's no hold barred and you're keeping to the actual historical
right.
kit and stuff, the problem then is that everybody's just in full plate armor, which didn't happen
Yeah.
in the early medieval period. You have people, farmers in particular, who would have just
Yeah.
had a spear on them. They wouldn't have had all of the kit that a lot of
Right.
people had. So if you go into, for example, the Battle of the Boyne or Volin, you're going to get this impression everybody was in armor, when that's not the case in reality. But then you've got the likes of over in Denmark where they're doing, what was it called? Where you just it's still blunt weapons, but you tap them and you can't do headhunts. But then what happens? Everyone drops the armor, you know. So then you don't have groups of people who have armor and groups of people that have no armor. And then you think to yourself, okay, can we have zones that are just full contact and, you know, this light touch? And what happens? People get mixed, because then people are like, oh, I feel like doing light touch now, and they end up
Right.
full force smacking someone to the head, which causes huge problems to health and safety and annoys so many people. But it happens because you just get into that habit. When you're being hit full force by someone else in full plate armor, you're going to get into the habit of just reacting. So you kind of lose the moment and stuff. So health and safety around that can be quite funny. So we do try to be as realistic in Europe, with the circles I'm in, with stuff with Mosgard and Voland and stuff. We do try to be as realistic as possible. However, it's constant health and safety would be our biggest problem in both with the Voland events and with the Mosgard and stuff. So yeah, I think we do try our best.
Yeah, it's you know, it is tricky because, you know, they seem to have cared less about the potential for eyes to be poked out in the first millennium. It's like, I'm just going to wear a nasal open face helm, and what happens happens. It's okay.
It's all in God's hands, you know.
So we had a question from Susan regarding harness fighting. Did the knights begin training at an early age? Yes. So the program for training to become a knight started at the age of 5 to 7 is kind of the age at which you start training as a page in someone else's household. Often you were sent to another household because it was kind of recognized that you would respect the instruction from strangers better than from your own family. I guess that has kind of been known about humans for thousands of years. So yeah, they would start pretty young, and you know, it would not only see, this is a thing about training to be a man at arms, a knight specifically. It wasn't just about the combat. You were being trained to be a proper member of noble society. So you were trained to serve table, because you would always serve the table of your better. You know, a count would serve a duke would serve a prince would serve an emperor, right? So you would be trained to serve table, how to carve. You would be trained proper table manners, how to wash hands using an aqua manil and a towel. And so you'd start there. And probably at the younger age, you would start with exercises. Like you would start physically training, but nothing that's going to destroy your body. They would recognize that there are certain things developmentally you shouldn't do to a small human body, right? A developing human body. But they would probably start physically training them. They would probably start training them with play swords, you know, wooden swords, right? So yeah, training would start very young. And so by the time you've reached 18 to 21 years old, you've been training in this martial art from a very young age, and you have most likely reached mastery by that point. So it's not shocking for an 18-year-old to be knighted necessarily, right? They're that good. Think about kids, you know, who do Eastern martial arts, right? Who do karate or, you know, jujitsu or taekwondo starting at the age of 5, right? Think about how good they are by the time they're 18. I mean, you do karate.
Yeah, I'm over here in what was it, Okinawa, doing karate, and yeah, it's a ton of fun. But it does help. You can see those tiny little 5-year-old children, and the standard of them is absolutely amazing. It's 1,000 times better than what you'd see in both America and Europe. However, a lot of them end up dropping out because of work being so strict here in Asia. And that's why you don't see as many dominating the Olympics, that the way that the Americans and the Europeans dominated, is simply because so many end up dropping out because of, you know, them getting involved with accountancy or them
Japanese work culture is like jobs. Korean work culture. It's toxic. It needs to change. It really does.
Yeah. Hopefully
yeah. So you know, they did start which meant also that their muscles developed. You know, gradually they would start, they'd start wearing layers of padded garments for training. And then eventually they'd have harness made and they would train in the harness. So, you know, it's not like they go from couch potato one day to full harness the next, which is, of course, actually the average experience of a modern harness fighter, is to go from couch potato one day to, you know, trying to do full harness the day they discover the activity. And then it's a struggle, right? They can't breathe. They can't move. Because you're trying to completely retrain your body. So I think that also feeds into the you have to be hoisted onto a horse with a crane mentality, because a modern person randomly put in harness probably would have to be hoisted onto a horse with a crane.
I see this happening all the time, especially on those documentaries where somebody would do
Right.
experimental archaeology, and you look at them and they've got the big potato belly, and they do the what was it, the experiment for 5, 10 seconds, and they're like, "Oh, no one can do this. This is impossible." And you're watching a television program or a YouTube video, going, "But you need to lose the belly." I'm sorry, I don't
No,
want to sound bad or
it's
anything, but if to do the experiment, you need the body of a
yeah,
medievalist, you
and
know?
I think that's something a lot of people forget is that, it used to be that a truly obese person, I don't mean a little belly, I mean like Henry VIII level of obese or bigger, was oddity in the pre-modern world.
Mm,
Like literally they used to have obese people as a display in carnival freak shows because it
yeah.
was so rare in the pre-modern world.
Mm,
And even up until the Industrial Revolution, that level of obesity was still literally remarkable in the sense that people would remark about someone who had achieved that level of adiposity. And this isn't fat shaming,
mm,
it's just a fact that it was much harder to achieve extra flesh of that nature in the medieval world. Merchants were starting
mm,
to, and yes, there are some kings. I saw some comments about some kings getting some girth by the end of their lives, earlier
mm,
predating Henry VIII. Yes, absolutely, but that's not morbidly obese. Morbidly obese is when you're so adipose that your circulation is impacted, so you start getting ulcers on your legs, like Henry VIII did, that never
mm,
healed because he doesn't have proper circulation for the tissue to actually heal because he has so much extra flesh. Right? That's morbidly obese. That's not just a little
mm.
round. But even still, you're right. If you've got this belly and you're trying to put on harness and you're trying to get on a horse and you're trying to do all these things these really fit knights used to do, you're going to fail. You're right. I don't think
Yeah.
it's fat shaming. It's just the truth. It's and
Mm,
that's not the same as saying that everyone had supermodel bodies, that all women were super svelte. No, women were actually expected to be a little bit rounder, not fat, but just have like curves, and especially to have like a belly
yeah,
that's shown that you'd given
exactly.
birth to a bunch of babies because that meant you were fertile and that was attractive,
Mm,
right? So, but that's a difference between that and so large that people have to carry you around on a litter, you know?
mm. Yeah, it is. It's a different body shape, and I think you hit the nail on the head as well. Is that even the interpretation of how a body should look in the medieval period is definitely different to our modern interpretation. Because I have this conversation with Asian women actually all the time, how they would talk about how, "Oh, I'm so fat, I'm so fat, and I'm so fat," and I'm looking at them going, "You're tiny and so skinny. What are you talking about?" Because from the perspective of an American or a Northern European,
Yeah.
they're
My
tiny little
Korean friends
petite
too, exact
creatures,
same
like,
thing. Exact same thing.
uh,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't say all of Europe is innocent, because then you go to the likes of, certain parts of Spain or France or Italy, and they would probably agree with them. I've come across loads of women who live in France, Italy, and Spain, and their family are constantly fat shaming them for having a little bit of hip, weight on the hips. And it's like, what are
Yeah,
they
leave
on,
leave them
like?
alone for
It's
God's
just a
sake.
different
Can
breed.
they
Yeah,
are they
exactly. Like,
healthy? Can they go about their daily lives
yeah.
comfortably without pain and suffering? And can they, can they and the most important question, can you run away from a bear? That's does doesn't
Well, in
matter how
fact,
big you are. If you can run away from a bear, you're fine. That's my measuring
oh,
stick. You just need to be able to run away from that bear. Yeah. So, the picture here is very, very late. Like this is post medieval. This is 16th century. And this is the era when
mm,
jousting has become pure sport. It is no longer like the cavalry charges. The pikemen have basically rendered those more or less null and void, right? The Landsknecht and
mm,
their ilk. These massive pikes just kind of make cavalry charges not effective at all. So jousting has
mm,
become just a game of war, and it's a sport. It's a pure sport. And they're literally, it's like literally two cars crashing into each other. It's like they've actually done physics studies on the physics and the force involved in jousting, and it is just like two cars crashing into each other at about 25 miles per hour. It's really
Mm.
violent, and it's really destructive to potentially to the horse and to the rider. Even if you're not getting actually pierced, right? Just the force. So, armor is developed that whose sole purpose is for you to be on a horse and be crashed into. And that's not the same thing as harness that is meant for foot combat in war, right? That's a whole different beast. And I think a lot of people look at the jousting sport armor and assume, well, that's what that must be what they wore for war, but it's not. This is absolutely not at all. This is what you're seeing, these really super actually heavy suits. And this one that you see here, it weighs 93 pounds. And even still, that's 93 pounds distributed over the body. It's still 93 pounds, but it's not 160 on your back. So,
Yeah, you can see that with the Fitzgeralds as well, is especially because I remember reading up on Maximilian and how Maximilian would have different sets of armor for different occasions, and you can see that in Ireland as well with the Fitzgeralds, where they allegedly would have had armor for their paintings, they would have had armor for tournaments, they would have had armor for campaigns, and they would have also had armor as well for, as you said there, the tournaments and
right,
jousting and stuff. It's not a case of them just having the one set of armor to take part in cavalry charges the way that they were doing during the the high Middle
right,
Ages and stuff. That it had become sophisticated by the time you get into the early modern period. And as you said there, those lance charges became exceptionally rare because they were so what was it called?
yeah.
Dangerous, especially for the nobility and stuff. Like, how many nobles did we lose during the Wars of the Roses?
It,
It
it was
was
wild.
wild.
And I mean,
Um,
even
yeah.
so in the 16th century, it's a sport, right? And we're still losing French kings to this
Mm,
sport, right?
yeah.
I mean, Henry IV dies. Henry III also, I think, or was it Louis? Right?
Mm,
I mean, and they don't die immediately.
yeah.
Like they get a splinter in the eye, it festers, they go septic, and they die a slow, painful, horrible death. Right? And
Mm,
that's just from a sport. Like this is not even a high stakes game of we're not battling over anything. We're just having fun crashing into each other with horses and sticks. And
and this is the thing now, is that once again, who's the best example? Henry VIII. Do you know? He's such a good example for everything that's wrong with that era.
oh, you might I don't think I can delete this person. Can you delete this person? Let me see.
Yeah.
Block him. Yeah.
But oh, he's not on my side. Maybe he's already deleted on my side. I don't know.
Yeah, that's weird because paired means he's coming from not me.
Yeah,
Well, it doesn't matter. I've whatever.
must be
Yeah.
already deleted on my
Yeah.
side. I don't
So
know.
Twitchy Witch, Han, you make a really good point. Sugar, one of the reasons that modern people are so much larger on average than historical people, it's the introduction of sugar and refined sugars and
Mm,
synthetic sugars to our diet. And you can actually see a big difference in the skeletal record in the teeth of skeletons in Europe.
mm,
You can almost see exactly the point when sugar became much more common because suddenly the teeth start rotting out of the skulls have rotten teeth. Whereas in the Middle
mm,
Ages, the pre-sugar Middle Ages, actually a lot of skulls have the teeth are worn down from like stone dust in the bread and whatnot and eating things they probably shouldn't be eating, but not rotted. They're not gone.
mm,
But after the advent of sugar, suddenly teeth, skull teeth rot away, just gone
mm.
in Europe. So yeah, if in the modern diet, if people would just cut the refined sugar out of their diet, they would see drastic improvement in their size. But
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, because I was talking about that this week as well, is the fact that teak was perfectly fine leading up to the Renaissance. And although you still have grain and stuff that's wrecking up the teeth during the likes of the High Middle Ages and stuff, going into the late medieval period, it's at that point when sugar's introduced into the diet more and more, that's when teeth start to get proper
right.
wrecked up. Yeah, that was another one as well. I got a few different interpretations off of people, some people agreeing, and then other people just not agreeing. I seen it in a film. In that film, he had black teeth. That's my
And that
source.
film,
Why
he
are you
had black
disagreeing
teeth.
with me?
Yeah, it's just, I mean,
Yeah.
yes, of course, there were still occasional cavities, but it was much more from the enamel wearing down, literally wearing down from like
Mm,
mechanical abuse. especially because one of the ways that they
Mm.
cleaned their teeth, and this is actually true, this is not a myth, one of the ways medieval Europeans cleaned their teeth was to use gritty powder to polish their teeth, because your teeth feel a little fuzzy after eating something like bread, right? Something with a lot of carbohydrates. And so
Mm.
they would use these polishing powders to polish their teeth, and they were literally wearing the enamel away. Yeah.
Jesus, what source? Can you remember the source from that one?
Oh
Is that
no,
15th
that's this
century?
this is several centuries. Yeah, it's there's mention in several like chronicles and books on medieval hygiene. And it's like, oh,
Because anytime I went looking for Irish sources to do with brushing the teeth and stuff, it would always just talk about twigs and using various branches and stuff like that to clean out what was in the mouth. Um, but the powder bit, gee, and that wouldn't surprise me because the Fitzgeralds and stuff were so connected, and the Butlers were so connected with Europe. Now I'm wondering if they were doing the same
right. Oh,
thing.
definitely. I'd be shocked if they weren't, honestly. This seems to have been something that was kind of
Mm,
pan-European. I seem to find it in most places, in at least in the western half of Europe. I haven't, because of language barriers, I haven't been able to do much research into Eastern Europe because a lot of that is still published in
mm.
local Slavic languages, which I don't speak. So, yeah, but it's to take this polishing powder and clean your teeth. Like, oh, I mean, yes, it definitely got rid of whatever was on the teeth, right? So that's good, but it
Mm.
also got rid of the
That's
enamel.
the main thing, And did it whiten your teeth as well?
Right.
Did
Well,
it?
actually, I haven't. Let me think about this. I don't think I've seen a recipe. Oh, no, I have. I think in Trotula there's a recipe for teeth whitening. And as per usual, it
Oh,
involves a
lovely.
bunch of crap you should not be putting in your body or on your body or near your body.
Yeah. Oh, reminds me of the bloody rant that the Welsh Viking had about, what was it, 5 years ago now, where people kept commenting about his teeth being yellow because he doesn't use anything artificial to change his teeth to being white. And he had a rant. It was a full hour video about why it's natural to have yellow teeth. And what was it called? Oh, his
Wow,
comment section was
that's one
brilliant.
hell of a rant.
Because stop. It's brilliant though.
I mean, uh, so there is Twitchy Witch, you're bringing up some great myths that we're going to be addressing in
Mhm.
in our episode on food myths. But I will say that
Mm.
I have seen archaeological evidence for grit, because they occasionally find weirdly preserved extant loaves of bread. And when they analyze them, they find that there is actually at least some grit in them and some sand. Because yes, you can sift out sort of the bigger chunks,
Mm.
but they didn't necessarily have sieves fine enough to get some of the smaller, finer particles, which are still fine enough to actually, still kind of grate against your teeth.
Mm, mm, mm.
Yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to close out our discussion of armor with this is a direct quote from Boucicaut, right? So everyone you should still be able to see. Philip, can you still see the? Okay,
I
great,
can see the
great, great,
presentation, no problem.
fantastic. Okay, unfortunately, because of the way this stupid thing displays, oh, I wonder if I can. No, I can't.
Oh, that's better.
Hold on a minute.
Oh, there you
Let
go.
me see if I put
It's kind of doing its
trying
own thing.
to no, it won't let me, unfortunately, because of the way this displays, like there's stupid controls right over top of the text. Anyway, this is a quote directly, so not from Boucicaut, this is from Jean Froissart, and
Mm,
he's talking about the things knights should be able to do. And he says, and now he
mm.
began to test himself by jumping onto a courser in full armor. There's the vaulting. And otherwise, he would run or hike for a long
Oh,
way to train himself to not get out of breath and to endure long efforts. And other times, he would strike with an axe or a hammer for a long time to be able to hold out well in armor. And so his arms and hands would endure striking for a long time and train himself to nimbly lift his arms. By these means, he trained himself so way that at that time you couldn't find another gentleman in equal physical condition. He would do a somersault armed in all his armor except his bassinet, and dance around armed in a mail shirt. And when he was at his lodgings, he would never cease to test himself with the other squires at throwing the lance or other tests of war. And so this kind of shows you, this is, all these things that he should be able to do in armor, also to dance in mail. And, mail shirts and all the layers of mail you would wear under your harness were still relatively heavy. So these are all the things a knight could in fact do. And what's interesting is this depiction, this picture here, is actually from an Italian source. Froissart is a French chronicler, right? And this is from a later 15th century source, so 1450 to 1460. And it shows these young men, the training of young men. And it really depicts a lot of the things that he's talking about, right? There's some wrestling happening. They're using heavy stones to train. There's a guy, with a stick that he's probably going to either throw, like a heavy sort of India club kind of thing. You've got these other two guys training, spear or a sword and buckler. You've got the somersaults over the table. And, then on the far right, you've got another guy with some kind of spear or javelin or something. So it's interesting how this concept of training the body, it wasn't just France, it wasn't just England. We have the same sorts of things depicted here, 50 years later after that chronicle in Italy. So it's the idea of physical training, like actually doing extra exercise to train is not a new one. And I've found multiple chroniclers from even slightly earlier periods talking about, in England specifically, how clerics should train themselves and stay in shape, priests and monks and whatnot, how they should do special extra exercise to stay in shape, because apparently, maybe people in certain classes of society were starting to get, a little too sedentary, like working classes, peasants in the field, craftsmen. Probably they had no problem just naturally staying in shape. But it seems that even among some of the upper levels of society, people were starting to get indolent enough that there needed to be special exercises. So, for knights, it's obvious that just sword training in harness, doing the martial arts training wasn't actually enough to achieve full fitness. You see all these extra things are recommended, just hiking in armor, right? Just to be able to build your endurance. So, that's for those of you who are modern men or women at arms, keep that in mind. Your weekly training session is not going to be enough to actually get you up to the fitness levels you're going to need for successful harness fighting, not even by medieval standards.
No. No, but it is interesting how we do have that kind of retinue that are expected to be of that standard of training. And then when we do that switch from retinue to regiment going into the early modern period, how a lot of this just disappears. It kind of slips off. And then we assume that, they didn't do any of this training because we've got the whole era between the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, where we have regiments doing most of the fighting, who do little to no fighting because, they're expected to stand there and shoot their rifle. That we then assume that, hey, look, the knights also didn't do any training. When in fact, that couldn't be the case, because we can see, even with both the literate, the knights who would have done all this training from the age of 7, it's the same thing with the gallowglass, the Gaelic mercenaries and the Gaelic retinue and stuff, is that we also see the same thing as well, where at age 7 they were taken off to do elite training, and that then disappears as we go into the early modern period with regiments, because it's like, well, I suppose they don't need to do any of this stuff, backflipping off armor and stuff. Why would a regiment need to be doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah. And yet sometimes you need to run.
Run away? What are you doing? Run away
I didn't
from the
say
enemy?
Run away. I just said run. It could be towards. It could be towards, right? Or the bear.
Yeah.
You need to run from the bear.
The bears on the field of France. The Russian
That's right.
bear.
The Russian bears they brought in for entertainment purposes. Yeah. So here's an closer shot of that training montage. This is the 15th century illuminated manuscript version of a training montage, just so everyone is aware. You should hear music playing as you're looking through the scene left to right.
It's 1920s
right.
music.
and also, so everyone's aware, the clothing that those men are wearing, that is the kind of clothes in which they would physically train, right? We have like sweatpants and lycra and all this stretchy modern fabrics. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen, you don't actually need them to be able to do physical fitness. You don't need petrochemical fibers in order to be able to stay fit. This thing that I'm wearing now, my blue kirtle, I have done a kickboxing workout in this multiple times. It is possible. You move a little
Mm,
differently, right? You understand there are some restraints, like you understand you have to move a little bit differently, but actually for men, their clothing was designed to allow full motion. So you can see this guy doing the rock raising, the overhead press with
mm.
the rock, right? That he can put his arms straight up, and the garments were designed to allow that, right? So you have full
Yeah,
range of
they should do
motion,
anyway.
and yet you'll notice the garment is still super fitted. So tailoring in the
Mm,
Middle Ages became so sophisticated in the 14th and the 15th century that they were able to design and sew and craft garments that would allow men at arms a full range of motion while still being fitted. And these are the layers that they would also wear beneath their armor, beneath their harness. Like their harness could point directly onto those garments. You don't have another layer. You
mm.
don't need another layer. That's it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I could definitely testify to that as well because during all the battles and stuff to do with early medieval fighting, with the what was it called? I had what was it? Boom, boom, boom. Oh my God, linen
Right.
under tunic, and then I had the woolly top on top, for especially during the winter and stuff. But I didn't. For me, it was a little bit of extra padding and stuff, especially when I put the riveted mail over that because I needed to be light, so I wasn't putting the gambeson on, but I was still having the woolly tunic underneath
Right.
that, so it wasn't the mail itself wasn't
Yeah.
rubbing and annoying me. And I didn't have any problems breathing. Like if that was a modern woolen top, oh my God, I'd be in bits. The sweat be pumping like no tomorrow. But I thought it was way easier with a medieval woolen top to be running around and doing all the medieval stuff compared to if I had a modern
Right.
top
Yeah.
on.
It's very
Mm,
true. We think we need these amazing, innovative fibers that have been invented in the modern world, but we actually don't. Okay,
mm.
moving on from armor. And if you have any questions about armor, drop them in the chat and we'll see if we can get to them later. Otherwise, we're going to move on to our medieval drab section of today's presentation.
Mm.
So I think, Philip, do you recognize this scene?
Oh, is it the same we were just
It
bitching about
is,
an hour ago from Mice and
it
Python?
is.
I one of my wife's favorite parts. Well, it's not her favorite part actually. The what was it? The Holy Grail is my wife's favorite
Yeah,
part.
yeah, that is a pretty funny part. This is the witch scene from the witch scene, right? Burner, Burner, she's a
Mm.
witch. How do you know she's a witch?
Oh, I.
Right. But this is where I'm pretty certain this is the point at which Hollywood got the idea that if it's medieval, it needs to be drab, and they need to be covered in poop or mud and poop,
Yeah.
as they say. What is it they say in the movie? How do you know he's the king? Well, he's not covered in shit, right?
Yes. Right. Jesus, another Mighty Python reference, which became fact according to a lot of people these days I
Right.
talk to.
Yeah. And it's
Mm,
but actually I'm going to say that despite the drab and the mud and the fecal matter that they're attempting to portray here, at least the silhouettes are pretty okay, right? Like there's no one here in leather
mm.
pants and a blossomy poet shirt. So at least there's that. But yeah. So ladies and gentlemen,
That's not until
yeah,
Vikings.
right. Oh my God. Oh my God. With dreadlocks, with dreads, right? Oh God,
Oh
you've got to
yeah.
have dreads.
Oh, the
The
arguments, the
dreads
arguments.
and the shaved heads and oh my God. Ugh.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, stop.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the medieval world was insanely colorful, right? They
Mm,
liked wearing bright colors more than most modern people like wearing bright colors, actually. Did so I'm pretty certain I was in Japan and I'm pretty certain I observed the same thing. Here in Korea, people wear mostly black and tan and white. Right?
oh,
Yeah, it's
uh,
the colors on Korean clothing are very conservative, which is odd because historical Korean clothing for the upper classes anyway was super colorful. So I don't
mm.
know, has Japan also gone the way of, black and tan and
You see, you have to remember, I'm
oh,
over
you're
in
not in Japan,
Okinawa,
you're
so
in
Okinawa
Okinawa.
always
That's not
thinks,
really Japan.
yeah.
That's like its own,
So Okinawa kind of, yeah, it
yeah.
is its own thing because Okinawa always mimics. It kind of has its own alter version of Californian styles. So the Americans will bring over their
Ah,
California,
right.
whatever's happening in California. will pick up an Okinawa, and then they'll give the, give a little bit of an Okinawan twist to it. Like, but Tokyo might be under that fashion style right now. It's not until next month. Next month I'll be going off to mainland Japan, so I'll keep an
Yeah,
eye on
I
that
seem to
to see
remember
what the
thinking,
fashion
wow,
is like on
everyone's really
mainland.
drab here too. But that was not the medieval world. So
Mm,
and we know this. So art, of course, Philip, you've heard my lecture on art. Like, it can be so dangerous. Like, this is medieval art.
mm,
Is this how people actually dress? No, this is a fantasy chick, right? This is literally a medieval
mm,
fantasy chick. She's an allegory for the sense of sound, right? The sense of hearing, rather, the sense of hearing. So she is dressed like an allegory. This is medieval fantasy clothing, literally. This isn't how actual people
mm.
dress. So you have to understand the context of your art. But there are plenty of sources that are documentary that tell us about colors. So, Philip, what do we have in Ireland?
Well, in Ireland, thank God, we actually have the early Irish laws. Fergus Kelly has done, loads of translations for the laws of that period, especially covering the likes of the Shanachas Mór and stuff in Ireland. And in that, which is translated into the book on early Irish farming by Fergus Kelly, we have a very good example of clothing in Ireland. Basically, as you can see here, I assume, Rachel, you probably correct me on this one because of the way that the dye goes over time and stuff. But most of the noble class would have dressed in the colors of more purple and blue. And you can see that in early Irish law, how at the very top you've got the likes of purple and blue. And then as you go down, although still very, very colorful, it puts them people into ranks. So then underneath that, you'd have the likes of green and yellow and orange and various colors like that. And then down at below again, you'll get more darker colors, but still more of, person of the rank of like the likes of green and colors like that are more simplified. And then the person that is actually wearing hardly any colors is the poor slave class during the early
Right.
medieval period, which has a very poor color black. And I do highlight a poor color black because then when we go into the late medieval and stuff, you've got a rich black that comes in that's only for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
elites. However, for the early medieval period, you have more of a poor black and a very poor white as well. Colors that are easy, you can grab from anywhere and just chuck it onto your slave, and that's written there in the early
Right. That's
Irish law
those
that
are
it's
the
only the
Brehon
slave
laws, right?
class. Yeah, the Brehon laws. And that then gives us a picture. Now, that how it works is it's not specific that, oh, the person at the top, he has to wear blue and purple. No, no. It's trying to highlight the fact that only the person at the top can be this level of
Right.
colorful. Okay. So he grabs all the most colorful colors and then chucks it onto himself. So he's walking around like what was that, a peacock, compared to everyone else, which has less and less colors, not as colorful, less, less silk, less wool. Now obviously the reason why I highlight that is the fact that you're dealing with a society that is trying to highlight that you need to be as
Right.
colorful as possible. And you can see that, like, look how colorful those colors are, the deep, reds, the nice little light blues there that highlight the fact that this character is this person is very, very colorful. And he's like something of a spaceman or something rather than like a medieval fantasy, like.
Right. Yeah. It's, so,
Mm,
I always tell people, especially in painting, like the colors you can achieve with painting, illumination,
mm,
even the colors you can achieve with, well, this is fabric, so that's a bad example. The colors you can achieve on
mm,
canvas, on panels, on walls, on frescoes, right? Those are not necessarily the same as the colors you can achieve with pigments. But thankfully,
mm,
we know what kind of pigments that were used in these textiles because we have extant, even the tiniest fragment of a textile, we can
mm,
analyze it and find out the dye stuffs that it contains. And so for first millennium Irish textiles, we found silk, we found bizarrely, like we talked last time, linen that is, survived because it's been
mm.
charred into preservation. We found wool, and when they analyze them and when they can actually, when there is still dye stuff present, because sometimes the dye stuff just goes away, it deteriorates over time,
Mm,
right? But when the chemical signature is still there, what we found is that, especially, I think they actually found a piece of silk from first millennium Ireland that had murex, traces of murex in it. Do
mm.
you know what murex is?
No,
Murex
no,
are
no.
those snails that make the royal purple, right?
Oh,
This
wow.
is a shellfish. It's a kind of shellfish in the native to the Eastern Mediterranean, and Constantinople was they were the only ones who knew how to make this purple. No one else. It was a secret. It was a trade secret. And unfortunately, it literally died in 1204 when the freaking Franks come in and sack the city, and production is literally, it stops right then and there. No more Murex purple. So that magical royal purple that everyone thinks of as royal purple comes from this little tiny snail. And it takes like 10,000 of these little tiny snails to make enough dye to dye one garment. And the production process is gruesome. You have to remove the snail, put them all in a vat. It has to ferment. It's a smell from hell. And, it has to take time to actually develop that deep color. And the fabric has to be dyed multiple times to achieve that deep shade. So that's why it's so expensive, why it was so expensive. But I do recall reading that they found a piece of little tiny scrap of silk from first millennium Ireland that had murex, evidence of murex in it. And that would have been absolutely imported from Constantinople, which is why, as you've often said, that is why the characters in the Book of Kells, if you put them side by side with iconography from the same era from Constantinople, and I wish I thought to do that. Sorry, guys. You can really, you've often said, like, it's very obviously Byzantine influence, right?
Yeah. Oh, big time. Like, this is what's crazy. And now even Irish academics are starting to question it. Why in Ireland are we using the word insular? Do you know? Because clearly, especially at the very start, around the 5th century, we have crosses that are popping up, all stone crosses that are still standing today randomly all over the Irish countryside. They're these crosses, and they're in the Byzantine Empire style, the Eastern Roman Empire style. And you can find every single sort of cross from Constantinople, from Egypt and Cairo, from around the Palestine area of Jerusalem and stuff. You can see all these crosses all over the place, and that style found all over Ireland. And there's various theories to why these crosses pop up, because we reckon it's people trying to show off to other Irish people. I saw this cross, it looked magnificent, and they would try to stone it down so they could show off to the locals. This is the cross that they're having in the Eastern Roman Empire. I seen this magnificent cross. Because they would have seen like physical golden versions of these crosses, and they have to bring it back then to Ireland, because the Irish, the monastic in Ireland and stuff, they want to be civilized. They want to be like the Eastern Roman Empire.
Sure.
So the idea, so the idea is that people are trying to, as much as possible with a stonemason or somebody who's good at stone, trying to make this carving out. So then people could look at it and say, oh, we can do this or something like this. And it's the same thing with these garments that you see in the Book of Kells. So this is taken from the Book of Kells. And to me, it seems like they were trying to mimic the style or the clothing that was coming in from trade. And the Irish were trying to give their own, as historians are trying to label it, insular, which is, it's such a funny word, because insular means closed. And yet this is complete opposite. This is Ireland. This is kind of a Hiberno Byzantine or a Hiberno Eastern Roman kind of mix here going on with this cloak that you can see here in the Book of Kells.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, colors, even in the first millennium, and the comment is, I never knew medieval people could afford so many colors in their attire. Okay. So the reality is that your average person, and this is kind of true for most places in Europe, only had a couple of sets of clothing. Right. They had multiple they usually, especially even, except for like the beggars on the streets, but, peasants, craftsmen, they would have had several shirts like this, undershirts, smocks, chemises, whatever your language, Lena, whatever your language of choice is, right? They would have had several of this, because this is the layer that goes on your skin and gets laundered, right? But they would not have actually had many copies of the overgarments, right? A couple, maybe, right? And so, yes, the thing they could, therefore, it could be dyed because they didn't have 100 tunics that needed to be brightly dyed. They had 3, right? And obviously, the higher up you go in the strata, the more clothing you can afford. The later you get in the Middle Ages, the less expensive. Because there's a shift from the warp-weighted loom in about the 11th century. The 11th century, I think, is when the horizontal loom is invented. The horizontal loom is the one every modern person basically knows, where you're sitting at it and you're working it this way, right? That's the horizontal loom, because it's horizontal to the ground. The warp weighted loom is a perpendicular loom, and it's much trickier to create long lengths of fabric with a warp weighted loom. It's much more time consuming. You can't produce as much as you can with a horizontal loom. So with the advent of the horizontal loom, fabric production can increase drastically for the same amount of labor, more or less, as you would need for the perpendicular loom. So that makes fabric cheaper, not cheap, don't not cheap at all, cheaper than it was before and more available. So then you start seeing an increase in the number of garments that people can own at all across the whole strata, right? So yeah, colors, of course. You know, obviously not everyone is wearing Murex purple. Not many people are, in fact. Very, very, very few people are wearing Murex purple. You know, and as the Middle Ages goes on, the kind of dye stuffs that are used tends to change. Like in Ireland, myth about Ireland, saffron.
We're starting arguments again.
yeah. Well, might as well address it here. We're
Holes.
talking about colors. Let's talk about saffron, shall we? I'm not certain if I remember to include a thing on saffron or not. But yeah, let's talk about saffron while we're looking at a mare from Waterford. Guys, saffron, I have not found any evidence for saffron being used in Ireland as a dye stuff before the 14th century. And it doesn't seem to become ubiquitous until the 16th century. There is some evidence of it being used in the 15th century for kerchiefs and shirts, but it's not everyone. Like it's not everyone has saffron dyed smocks, Lena, or kerchiefs. They just don't. It's just it doesn't even make it to England as a plant in Ireland until the 14th century. And the amount of saffron you would need to create a saffron yellow shirt is prohibitively expensive if you're importing it from Spain. And it's just, there's just no evidence of that trade. There is no, I have not found the evidence of saffron in Ireland before the 14th century. And I found no evidence of it being like mentioned in any sources. Like you sent me that poem, but I couldn't find a single mention of saffron in it.
Yeah, I need to go back over that one actually. Because even on top of that, you made a very good point while we were talking away with that. It could be the translation from, what was it, Old French to English in one of the translations where somebody was translating it and they really wanted saffron, was it yellow, to be there. So when they saw yellow in Old French, they could have turned around and says, oh, that's saffron, or it could be some kind of interpretation online. So it's definitely something I have to look back over to see what's going on in the translation going between Old French to modern day English. Did you look at the Old French version?
I did. I couldn't find any mention of the word saffron in French.
And is when they're talking about the kerns,
I couldn't find that section at all. Actually, I couldn't find anything about flowing hair. Nothing. So I'm not certain if it's a different poem. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe I got completely lost.
But I didn't find. I looked. I tried. I looked through the Old French. I did all kinds of searches for different 10 different siblings of saffron, and I couldn't find a mention of the word saffron in there at all. And because it was a 19th century translation into English, my feeling is really that even though I couldn't find the word saffron in the English version either, honestly. So, but even still, the second it's a 19th century translation, I'm like,
Yeah, I was even thinking, I was like, I'll send this on to Rachel to be on the safe side, because I was afraid somebody would play it like, oh, there's a 19th century translation. So I sent it on to you and then have you just, because I knew you were going to disavow it anyway and tear it apart because it was 19th century. But I wanted you to know that one was there at the time, because I was doing, I was dealing with, as you know yourself, personal stuff, and also the research, and it literally popped up and I was like, oh, I have to send that on to Rachel just so she could take it apart. So that's what happened there. I just kind of sent it off to you, and you just took it apart very quickly.
I can't, I mean, I couldn't, I'm not certain if it's even the right, because I couldn't even find, I mean, I looked for flowing hair. I couldn't find any of the passage that you quoted to me at all in there. So maybe it's a different,
I'm sorry about
different poem altogether.
I didn't realize it was that bad of a fucking reference. Like, I'll go back over that and see what happened there. Like,
yeah, I mean,
it could be a different version. Like if it's that bad, maybe it could be even a different version. And then when it popped up on the internet, somebody had put in the wrong, because they don't realize that the poem pops up as in it's rewritten a few times.
They're different versions.
So it could be a different version. Which no wonder.
And the version they're referencing might not be the one based on the older French one, like the version they're referencing. Because of course, like in the 17th century, there's a whole bunch of books of poetry and epics that are published in Ireland, right? So there's because there's some references I found to saffron, and they all ended up dating to the 17th century. Like I mean, there's
there you go,
sagas. They reflect things that happened centuries before, but they're written in the 17th century, which means they're going to automatically apply their 17th century authorial filter to it.
But I think Catherine is right, because in the comment section, Catherine is like, oh, onion skins make nice golden yellow dye. And that could be the mix up. They could be mixing up the the onion skin dye with saffron. And I feel like even when I was looking through it just before I sent it over to you, I was like, I guarantee it's going to be some other dye of that era that's getting mixed up with saffron.
Yeah, so it's probably, so onion skins is also a myth, apparently, about medieval dyeing. Onion skins can't crop up as a dye stuff in like the 1970s during the arts and crafts movement. I have looked through dozens of medieval dyeing manuals of medieval art books, and by which I mean like written in the Middle Ages about art and how to create pigments and colors and dye stuffs. And I have found zero reference to onion skins. And actually, it seems that if you trace the cultivars of onions back, our big, fat, bulbous onions are not medieval. Medieval onions were much smaller. They were more like green onions, like spring onions. That was the medieval cultivar of onions. So there were no skins, right? They didn't have yellow skins, and they didn't have the thick skins that we have now. Onions have been selectively bred over the centuries to turn into what they are now. They're monstrous versions of their medieval selves. So they didn't even have onion skins, which is why onion skins don't crop up anywhere as a material in any of the art manuals, any of the dyeing manuals. They're not mentioned in the least. So I'm pretty certain,
Just to be, just finish your bit, because we'll have to, there's just a bit on Diarmaid MacMurrough I want to hammer down.
So I don't think onions were dye skins could be used for them. Weld was used. Weld is a weed. You would never look at it and think that will produce a yellow dye, but it will. Weld produces yellow. There's some wood that grows in Europe. Gelbholz, it's called in German, and I forget what it's called in English. Yellow means yellow wood. There's lots of things that occur naturally all over Europe and in the medieval period that could be used to achieve yellow. Weld was probably the most common.
It's funny because another reference people will use for saffron in the 13th century is Gerald of Wales's topography of Ireland, where both the Fitzgeralds and Diarmaid MacMurrough they both have a yellow tunic on, and it's highlighting a yellow tunic as well. So a lot of people are like, oh, well, that's saffron, which, by the way we're having the conversation right now, perhaps it isn't saffron. Maybe it's a different yellow dye. But then it does make me wonder, why are they wearing that yellow dye?
Well, I mean, so this comes back to the conversation about art. The colors. So here we've got, this is I know somewhere in here is that Gerald of Wales. Somewhere in here is that Gerald of Wales picture, and unfortunately, it's going to be too lengthy for me to try to find the damn thing.
It's buried somewhere.
we'll get to it when we get to it. But yeah, here's Art McNamara, and this is from Froissart's Chronicle talking about him. And so this dates to like 1400 ish.
Oh, that's 1499. You're bang on. Yeah. 1499.
So I mean, but no, I mean this exact, like this chronicle, this illumination dates to like 1405. So it's very proximal to the thing to the action. It's the 1390s, right?
Yeah, it's 1399. Sorry, that's not 1499. It's 1399. That's when that action happens.
But this is very proximal to the actual event. So it's not like some chronicles that are illustrated centuries later. This is like 5 years later. But this artist is basing his depiction on the writing, but the writing doesn't talk about, it says bright colors, but it doesn't specify the colors. So this is the artist's interpretation of bright colors. Which may or may not have anything to do with the bright colors that they were actually sporting at this meeting. Same thing for Gerald of Wales. The artist, I don't think the text part actually talks about the colors. I think it just talks about you know, because he does talk about the shape of the clothes. He's got some very interesting things to say about the clothing of the Irish, actually, in the late 12th century. So I'm pretty certain that the artist is just going based on either what he has pigments for, or what he sees about him in general. And yeah, so I mean, but there's weld. They can absolutely use weld. Weld, it's yellow is a nice bright color. Weld makes a very decent yellow. You know, so, and it's a weed. It grows everywhere. So it's an easy dye. You don't have to import it from somewhere else. It doesn't take lots of processing, unlike Murex. You know, it's common, it's renewable. So absolutely, weld would make much more sense as a common everybody's yellow than saffron, which is worth more than gold by weight.
So that actually does make more sense. Instead of having, because the Irish don't like wearing white tunics and stuff, it does make sense that they are just wearing yellow tunics so they don't look like a slave. I think that's the fear that the Irish have, is like, well, I don't look like a slave. I don't have a white tunic on. So they're getting whatever they can to quickly dye it so it's not white and they don't get associated with looking like a slave.
Right. Could well be. So yeah, you always have to be careful about the difference. And Twitchy Witch says it, Han says it, you know, there's a difference between pigments that you can use to create paints and dye stuffs, and their effect relative to fabric versus wood panel, canvas, fresco, statue. Statues are painted, by the way. Most of the statues that we have now have completely lost their paint, but they used to be brightly painted, just like the walls of churches in medieval Europe were brightly painted. So not only were the people colorful, but their entire world was colorful, you know. So yeah, you know, we have these dyeing manuals, and we have lots of documentary evidence about colorful clothing, right? And this is, people might not realize, you might look at this and think Frenchman, right? Like when you look at this, Philip, if you were just casually looking at this picture, not having seen it with me 1,000 times before, what would you say about this gentleman and his point of origin?
Yeah, you would definitely, because we constantly been hammered over and over again about the whole savage Irish, etc., etc. You would think he was a man from, Burgundy or Paris or London. Your brain wouldn't associate it with somebody from Ireland.
Right. Yeah, this is the mayor of Waterford in 1378. And yeah, so once again, I'm not saying that this art is proof of colorful clothing, but we know from Exton Textiles from Waterford in about this time that they had fabric of both these rich colors, both this wonderful blue and red. The red of there is one piece of wool from Waterford that has kermes. Kermes, do you know what kermes is, Philip? Do you remember my lessons?
No.
Jeez, it's like you don't learn anything from our sessions. No, I'm teasing.
Terrible.
Kermes is a louse. It's a bug.
Yeah.
And it grows on an oak tree, a special kind of oak tree in the Mediterranean regions. Very limited habitat for kermes. And they produce the most expensive. They produce this red dye, basically. This would have been kermes in the medieval period. It is the most richest, most saturated, most vibrant red of medieval culture, and it's the red of that you see on the hosen. It's the red you see on those amazing red hats, and it was a luxury item. So the fact that we have in Waterford, I think it was even the fabric samples I'm talking about were 12th or 13th century, we have scraps of wool with kermes dye, not only shows that Ireland was still colorful into the later Middle Ages. By archaeological evidence, it was connected to the Mediterranean for certain.
Oh yeah, I definitely believe in that as well. Like, because the amount of money that they're making, it does show that they were connected into the Iberian Peninsula and then from there into the Mediterranean world, which makes sense, as we were saying, going into the later medieval period of the likes of the 16th century and stuff, that you suddenly have saffron coming into the island of Ireland, and then the sudden change of weaponry that's more of an Iberian influence rather than an English influence into the island, does show that Ireland is heavily connected with the Iberian Peninsula, and then from there into the Mediterranean Sea. So that makes perfect sense to me. Like,
Yeah, it's really, you know, if you all are interested more on the medieval Irish textiles, Philip and I did a great live stream a couple of weeks ago. You can check out the recording, I think, on either of our channels. I think the recording posted on your channel, didn't it?
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see. It's on on at least one of the channels. Yeah, so the other thing about colors, and so people think, well, okay, well, the rich people could afford colors, or maybe the up and coming merchant class, but what about the poor people? Well, I don't know about how the treatment of poverty worked in Ireland, but in Europe, in most parts of Western Europe, there were hand-me-downs, so there were secondhand clothing markets, right? And so people, the wealthy, eventually they would actually sell their clothing on, especially when people died. If they had a lot of clothing left, then their heirs would often sell it to a secondhand clothing dealer, and the secondhand clothing dealer would then sell it in the market. And this is a way that people with not much money could absolutely afford clothing that was colorful, that had been, in its original life, dyed a nice color, and that was actually a little bit more sumptuous than maybe their station should allow, but they could afford it, and therefore they could wear it. So even and then the really poor, like the indigent poor, the homeless, the people who were really on hard times, they were provided clothing often by charitable institutions, monasteries, convents, foundations that were set up specifically to care for the poor. They would actually get a suit of clothes a year that were decent, that were new, that were freshly made. And sure, they weren't made from kermes, but they could be dyed at least a simple color, woad blue, for instance. Woad could be used to achieve a blue not quite like that, because that's lapis lazuli.
That's more fancy stuff.
That's a super expensive blue pigment. That was the luxury pigment. This was the BMW of pigments of the 15th century, lapis lazuli. But you could use woad, which is a weed. It grows everywhere, to create a pretty decent blue, like this blue, for instance. You could absolutely get that out of woad. So yeah, even shepherds even could have clothing. Now, granted, again, these shepherds have been painted deliberately in lapis lazuli to show to everyone, look, I'm rich. My shepherds can be painted in lapis lazuli. Yeah. So what is the situation? Do you know anything about the secondhand market in Ireland, or
hand-me-downs,
how the poor were clothed?
When it comes, like, I can imagine it easily happening in the clans out in the countryside, that they are just handing each other hand-me-downs easy enough. It's like, hey, Michael, this fits you. Here you go, kind of job. And that's kind of how clans function. But when it comes down to in the city areas, to be honest with you, Rachel, I'm actually quite ignorant. I don't know how hand-me-downs work in both Dublin, Waterford, and those other city areas in Ireland. To be honest with you, exactly what you said there kind of makes sense with the city areas in Ireland,
Right.
for it to be a case of them selling it on, or doing those bits and bobs and stuff. So I'm just going to assume what you said there is what's happening in the city areas of Dublin, Cork, Waterford, and Limerick, and Galway as well. But to be honest with you, no, very ignorant on the subject, to be honest with you.
You haven't, in any of your readings about the Fitzgeralds or the Butlers, etc., you haven't read anything about them providing for the poor, or making bequests, or something like that, founding, imbuing a foundation with money in order to care for the poor, or something like that.
Not specifically, because I've never actually gone on my way. But now that you say it, there is a lot of, the bells are ringing in my head going, do you know the Fitzgeralds do donate a lot of stuff? And they're not the only noble class to be doing that. You do hear about the likes of, because I'm down in the south, by the way, guys. You do hear about the likes of the Fitzgeralds, the McCartys, and the Bryans talking exactly like that, especially towards their local monastic sites and stuff, that they would have the hand-me-downs and stuff.
Yeah. So I'm especially because of the connections, the culture, not just the socioeconomic connections, the mercantile connections, but the church connections, right? Like the concept of monastic communities participating in acts of charity and providing care and food and clothing for the poor is not unique to mainland Europe. That was a church concept. in
Yeah.
the medieval period. So it completely makes sense that the monastic communities would have probably provided a similar service. I
Yeah.
also feel like maybe out in the countryside, there's it's a different kind of culture, right, in Ireland
Yeah.
than it is on the mainland. So I feel like there might have been more of a natural tendency for the clans to kind of care for their own poor. Is that
I think
is that a false
that's
impression?
Yeah, because the thing is with the clans is they're also very much connected with the monastic site. So
Right,
when you said about whole giving and stuff, I'm like, they're always doing that with the monastic sites. And it must be a case of them giving it. So they have their monastic site with their Irish saint and stuff. And it's a case of them giving it to the monastic settlement, and then the monastic settlement from there giving out to the wider area.
right,
Um, and it's always like for them, because there's endless amount of examples of the McCarthy's, for example, literally anytime they're giving to the monastic site, saying, hey, look at us, we're giving to this monastic settlement, we're giving them loads of land, we're
right,
giving them loads of charity work and stuff. And then on top of that, it is the key figures of the monastic settlement to go out and show, hey, look, we're constantly giving to the poor, look how much we give to the poor, aren't we great, we're going to heaven.
right,
And then on top of that, the reason why the McCarthy's, for I'm using them for the example here, is giving to the monastic settlement specifically is to justify why they're praying for their soul for when they go to purgatory, because they know they're going to purgatory. It's not a
everyone
case
knows
of
they're
them.
going to
Yeah,
purgatory. Everyone knows
the
that.
McCarthy's, if you read Tundle's Vision is one of the greatest example, which is specifically aimed at the McCarthy's and why the McCarthy's are going to heaven, is they highlight in Tundle's Vision, which is, by the way, written by the McCarthy, well, for the McCarthy's, they highlight the fact, hey, look, we're going to purgatory because of all the evil things we've done that we've committed, but
Right,
we have all these people praying for us, So the McCarthy's constantly highlight the fact, hey, we're going to purgatory, but hey, look at us, we're giving to the monastic settlement.
right.
That's why they're praying for our souls, and that's why we're going to heaven. So while our enemies, because when they write stuff, just like other Irish are writing stuff against them, it's like, you're going to hell and you're going to burn and suffer. The McCarthy's are kind of like, hey, wait, no, we're not. We're going to purgatory because we have all these priests praying for our souls.
Yeah, it's really it's very interesting. Susan makes a good point. Then the Reformation
Mm.
comes along, the monasteries are just are dissolved, and suddenly poverty is moralized, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly you have the gospel of the prosperity gospel. So all of these people are dumped onto the streets and considered a burden on society rather than the responsibility of society. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, a couple of good comments there from Twitchy Witch. Yeah, so it's absolutely true that people would often will bequeath their garments to the cities, their areas poor, whatever that was, whether it was their village or their town or their city, right? They would absolutely bequeath their garments to the poor. And I've also found in a bunch of wills I was just reading from York and London, and I think also from Dublin,
Mm.
they would bequeath 20 suits of clothing to poor people, to be their mourners, right? To actually be mourners as part of their funerary proceedings, and also to pray for their souls to shorten their time in
Yeah.
purgatory. But
I
then they
was
would get
just,
to keep those clothes, right?
yeah.
Now, interestingly, they're mostly white because white was often the color of mourning.
Mm.
Or they're black, also a color of mourning, but I think probably much more expensive than the white ones are. But then if they're white, it would actually be really easy to have that over dyed.
Mm.
Or to over dye it yourself if you have your own little if you have the ability to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah, so definitely also poor people were often provided with clothing, either these actually new garments or hand-me-downs that would have also already been dyed. So I really just don't, the vision of poor people in brown, brown, gray, drab clothing, I don't think that's probably true either of the medieval period.
It is a very, very funny one, especially when you are dealing with poor people, because of the fact that they can, as you can see with the endless amount of examples during the 100 Years' War, where you have people who are not just getting bits and bobs of hand-me-downs, but also on top of that, they end up having businesses that become exceptionally successful. One of the best examples, obviously, is all the sheep trade that's happening in the south of England at the start of the 100 Years' War. Like,
Right.
there's endless small people who were barely getting by. Like, they literally put all their savings into this sheep was the sheep investment in the south of England, and then suddenly, boom, they're the billionaires of their era. They're suddenly gone from the barely being able to survive eating bread and so on and so forth to suddenly becoming successful merchants and stuff. In fact, I was covering that. I'm going to be actually covering that over in my Patreon this Sunday night. And that's the fact that you have the Dal Cash, who start off as absolute nobodies. And then within only about 50, 80 years, because they built their ring fort in a very important trade area, and they dominate the trade going around Limerick into the Iberian area, so on and so forth, they end up becoming a very low, insignificant to or clan to becoming literally Brian Brew becomes Emperor of the Gael. He takes over all of Ireland, so it is a very funny topic that we have, especially when dealing with the lower classes, that you do get bits and bobs where they do get a little bit of money, but is it a case of them investing wisely and becoming billionaires overnight of the period, or do they drink it away?
Yeah, so Twitchy Witch makes a funny comment. Do people think that fabric just comes out gray and brown? That requires dye too. Yeah, I know. I know, Twitchy Witch. It is. I mean, yes, you can from wool. You can get some, natural hues, natural blacks, which is probably the black that is referenced in the first millennium in the Brehon laws was probably black sheep's wool. It was not dyed black. You just dyeing anything black is a really expensive process. So it was probably just black sheep's wool versus natural kind of white sheep's wool, right? Those are probably. Yeah. No, yes, Twitchy Witch, you're absolutely right. Question, did the monasteries also serve as a place to stay for travelers in Ireland?
Yeah, I've heard about that actually loads of times. Irish monastic settlements are built differently to what was it called? How you have in Europe and stuff, because in the early medieval period, when kind of bringing the ideas of what is a city to Ireland, the Irish taught, those big cities you see in Rome and stuff.
Yeah.
The Irish taught that those would be, they would have the monastic settlement in the middle, and then people would build around it. But they're not that big, and the reason why we think they're not that big and then become the big massive cities is because the same time when all these ideas are coming to Ireland, the Justinian plague comes with it, right? So the Irish are freaking out, and so what happens is that they're building all of these cities with the monastic church in the middle, and then all these buildings around it, but then at the same time the Irish don't want to be in these new cities. And so they're building ring forts. They build these small ring forts dotted all over the island in kind of built up areas. They're so random. Like I'm trying to give a talk on Sunday on Brian Brew and stuff because he builds his ring fort just on the right spot. So he's able to dominate the trade in that area. But what you have then going into the high Middle Ages and the late medieval period is, instead of building universities or anything, like even places for travelers to stay, that stuff is already built up. So there's already a spot to go and do university studies in. So anytime people ask, okay, so where are the universities, where are travelers staying? They're staying in the monastic settlements because those things are already built up from the early medieval period.
Right. Yeah. So I can, yeah. It's funny how everyone forgets about the Justinian plague, right? Like, or some people don't even know about it. So you can't forget about it if you never know about it, but it's not taught in American, when Americans learn European history, the Justinian plague isn't even mentioned. It's not even a footnote in
the same here.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't even learn about it until much later in my medievalist career. And I'm like, why have I never heard about this thing that killed 90% of Europe and literally is the thing that probably ended the Roman Empire, actually, the Western Empire for certain, right?
Oh, for fact. Like the people are now looking at the events of 475, and they're scratching their head going, there's no stopping the administration. There is a change in the administration, but the administration doesn't stop. But as you said there, in 550, God, all of Europe, including Ireland, huge change in like the Roman Empire, their administration is gone. Ireland has David McCurble, who ends up being, sacrificed. Although he's the last Christian. His death is he ends up getting killed by his foster son. But after he's dead, they get his body and they sacrifice it. Because the Irish are so super, they freaked out about the Justinian plague, and they thought that was God or their new god, basically
Right.
saying, "Hey, you guys are cursed," So they went off and they sacrificed his body afterwards, doing the threefolded debt, which is always it's always a mark. If you in your time, if you were a terrible king, they would get your body and they would give it a threefolded debt. You were meant to be alive during the threefolded debt,
Oh,
which means
nice. That's fun.
which is where, like, if you were to take a normal version of it, it's where they would cut off your nipples, then they would set you on fire, and then they would drown you. So that's kind of like the default version. And some people think it ends up evolving into the hung, drawn, and quarter. The hung, drawn, and quarter is a threefolded debt. And they did this because they thought, your reign was cursed by God himself. And to keep God happy, we're going to give you a threefolded debt. But you have to remember, this is 550 is the period when they're switching to paganism, to Christianity.
Right.
And then in 550, there's a sudden switch. They even switched the capital. The capital of Ireland used to be Tara, and now it's been moved to Clonmacnoise, the monastic settlement I was telling you about, these new cities, which everybody's like, I don't want to be in a city. I don't want to get the Justinian plague.
Right.
And that's why there's so much of this like weird backwards stuff going on, of people doing human sacrificing to their new god. Hey, Jesus, does he like sacrificing? It's too late. I'm already sacrificing.
That's right. Yeah. So, to kind of close up the idea that, everyone was drab and poor people wore rags. So the poor people, like everyone but the nobility, wore rags. So this is so not true that by 1285 in France, they're passing sumptuary laws. Sumptuary means luxury, so sumptus, luxury in Latin. Laws to limit the consumption of luxury goods across society in French society. Mind you, France in the 13th century is not big. By the way, it's a pretty small kingdom. But they regulate not only the nobility, but they actually have to regulate the lower classes as well. And they have to tell them that they're not allowed to wear gold or silver or silk or fur of specific kinds. Because the craftsmen are getting so affluent by the 13th century in France that they are wearing these items and offending their noble betters by wearing basically the same things they are, because they can afford it. Because that's how well off they are and I'm talking craftsmen. I mean, like tailors, like carpenters. We're not talking like goldsmiths who might naturally just automatically have more at their disposal. And then in England in 1363, in the same batch of laws as that include the Statutes of Kilkenny, it's like all at once, Edward III is suddenly concerned about excess. And actually the Statutes of Kilkenny are also, if you really read them closely, they're much more practical and much less prejudicial. They're not really focused on prejudicing against the Irish. They're concerned about consumption, and they're concerned about identity, being able to identify people. Right. And so they passed similar laws, the same law in England. And I'm going to read to you what is ordained. So it is ordained, first, as to grooms, as well as the servants of great men, of traders and craftsmen, that they shall have cloth for their apparel, whereof the whole cloth does not exceed 2 marks per piece. Whole cloth would be the entire length, and that's an official length at this era. And that they shall not use any article of gold or silver, or embroidered, or enamel, or of silk, and that their wives, daughters, and children shall be of the same condition in their apparel, that they shall wear no veils exceeding 12 shillings each, and that carters, ploughmen, drivers, oxherds, cowherds, shepherds, swineherds, dairy women, and other keepers of beast, threshers of corn, all manner of men engaged in husbandry, and other people who have no goods and chattels worth 40 shillings, shall wear no cloth save blanket and russet worth 12 shillings the yard. They shall wear no girdles. They shall have linen according to their condition. They shall live upon such food and drink as is suitable, and then not in excess. So apparently all of these, we're talking swineherds, shepherds are starting to dress above their station, right? So this is how common it was for pretty much at all levels of society for people to be dressing nicely. A blanket, by the way, is a kind of wool. It's where the word blanket comes from, because blankets, wool, originally, though it was a fabric, a kind of specific weave of wool. Russet is also, it's kind of a red-brown wool. Yeah. So all of those
all
different
kilts.
peoples have been told, you're going to stop dressing like noblemen, basically. So that's how not raggedy and how not drably the most of the people, because I just quoted to you, that was a pretty broad cross section of medieval society, that they're able to, and doing it often enough that a law has to be passed, right? You don't pass laws against things that aren't happening. That makes no sense, right? So
It does make me wonder, as you were highlighting there, that they have to bring in the statutes of Kilkenny in Ireland. So it does indicate to me, and you're looking at likes of Art McMurray there kicking around, like that looks like he's got a silk headdress on, not just a
yeah,
woolen one in that picture that you gave me there, but a silk one, you know. And we do see, like in the early medieval period, we have silk making its way to Dublin, and we also have all those finds in
yeah,
Waterford and stuff as well, with the golden embroidery and stuff. So the fact that the Irish aren't just dressing foreign to the English with their own fashion and style, which could be influenced from the Iberian Peninsula, we just don't know in the 14th century. But it does kind of indicate the fact that, you know, the Irish aren't just dressing away from the English, but they're also dressing really fancy to
they
the
are.
English,
And in
perhaps,
fact,
which may have annoyed
the
them even
statutes
more.
of Kilkenny actually literally, there's a quote that literally talks about, so that we can tell the difference. Because the Irish are dressing like the English and the English are dressing like the Irish, we need to be able to tell you two people apart. And it came down to being able to actually, they use the word enemy, and I think that's referring to a specific kind of Irish raider, probably. Like it's not all the Irish who are peaceably living in these lands. Like, we want to know if you're coming into the Pale, because of course that's kind of, you're getting into that little small restricted part of Ireland that was in the English Dominion, right? If you're coming into the Pale, we want to be able to recognize you as, you know, coming in here for probably not particularly good intentions, you know, to steal cattle or whatever.
My cow. Yeah, it is funny, that word enemy, because I was looking at the sources from both Lionel of Antwerp and Richard II, and they're always having a bloody panic attack, the two of them, because one moment they're talking to the likes of the Fitzgeralds, and then the Fitzgeralds are popping up on a hill with the likes of the McCartys and the O'Briens attacking them, and they're like, "What's going on here? I thought you were meant
Right.
to be English," and now suddenly you're running around with the enemy. Like, are you rebel, or are you,
Right.
what
What
are
are
you,
you?
like, you know? It's confusing for the English, the new English, who've just kind of rocked up and are walking around the island. They can't tell the difference between these old English that have meant to be here since the 13th
Right.
century and the Gaelic, you know, especially the way they're dressing and clothing. And what's funny as well is that if you look at the annals, they don't even call the old English English. They refer to them just as foreigners. So they're calling these new English coming in with Richard II and stuff, they call them
Right.
English, they're English. But according to the annals, the likes of the Hiberno Normans, or whatever you want to call them, the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers,
They're
they're
foreigners.
foreigners.
They're
They're
just
just foreigners. They're
foreigners.
not Gaelic. They're,
That's so
yeah,
funny.
yeah, it's weird.
These,
Like,
which by modern standards, it's
they,
like Fitzgerald, quintessential Irish name, right?
yeah,
Like, I
yeah.
mean, linguistically, it's
But
not,
they're,
but
yeah. Oh, it's funny, like, it's just funny because they just use the word Gael. Like, any single time the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers, they pop up in the same. So you have like Richard II, English, they're the
right.
Saxon people. But then you have the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers, and they're like, and then the Gael went walking, and then the Gael went to the shop. That's how they literally call them and refer to them. And it's just, it's weird and it's funny,
It is
like.
pretty funny. For the English, a big identifier in the 14th century, is, according to the statutes of Kilkenny, is facial hair and hairstyle, right? So apparently, you know, the English associated beards and mustaches, especially beards, as being very Irish. And so they actually, basically, there's a law that says that the English have to shave. They have to shave basically every 2 weeks. Like, they can only have enough growth that would reflect natural 2 weeks of growth. Anything more than that, you're
Yeah.
violating this law, because now you're starting to look Irish there, buddy.
Oh, you see, that would have really undermined them as well because they kind of take on that kind of Iberian kind of Welsh, because there was also an earlier Welsh interpretation, Welsh philosophy as well, of being able to tell the difference between a man and a woman through the beard, and that was seen very manly to have a large beard. That's why you constantly have depictions of the likes of Diarmaid MacMurrough and stuff with a big, long,
Right.
grizzly beard, because clearly they're a
Obviously.
man. That's what they wanted to identify
Very
themselves
manly.
as. So for them to be shaving and stuff, the likes of the Fitzgeralds, and then going back to talking to their McCarthy
Right.
neighbor must have been
Yeah,
embarrassing.
no doubt. Yeah. So Twitchy Witch Han makes a really good point. A medieval irony: the plagues were an economic boost and made class distinction much smaller. Yes, that's a very good point. So Twitchy Witch, these laws post-date the Kilkenny statutes and the 1363 sumptuary laws on the English side post-date the Black Death, right? Which basically, killed 50% of Europe, and it completely opened doors for higher wages. And also, literally, there's all these empty estates now. There's empty homes with all these wealthy. There was looting. Absolutely, there was looting. And so you probably do have the survivors, especially at the height of the mania of surviving the plague, going in and taking these luxury goods that are just in these now empty homes. So yeah, it's a kind of a double effect of, well, now there's all these unclaimed luxury goods. But also there is more economic opportunity to demand, there's a shortage of labor. Do you want me to work for you? Well, then you're going to have to pay me more because I don't have to work if I don't want to.
Exact same thing happening in Ireland, where for years they were trying to do the bastard feudalism in Ireland. It's kind of like basically trying to force a circle into a square with the Normans coming in and trying to bring in the old Norman feudalism. It's just kind of becoming this kind of bastard feudalism. But then with the Black Death, it's just a complete failure. That's why suddenly the Fitzgeralds and Butlers, they're a part of this clan system, more of the clan system that we would recognize today, rather than the early medieval Tuat system, where groups were more like king groups, where they were made up of fostering and marriage alliances and hostages and stuff, where families were very, very mixed in the early medieval period. In the late medieval period, you knew the O'Briens were the O'Briens, the McCartys were the McCartys, and the Fitzgeralds were the Fitzgeralds, but they were all a part of this new clan system after the Black Death. And then on top of that, as you were saying there, the Gaelic, they're moving now into cities. So the cities were very English. Now the Gaelic, and they can't speak any English, they've now taken all of the jobs in the cities. And even on top of that, like old families from the the Hiberno Scandinavians, the Ustmen, they've moved up rank. So they were kind of moved down a peg when the English came in to take all those jobs, the high level administration jobs in the cities. Now you have Hiberno Scandinavians that have been working the markets and the trading jobs, and they knew it better than the English that were doing the administration. Now they're very quickly just taking the administration, and then they're highlighting their Scandinavian roots again, like all the way up to the 18th, 17th century. They'll highlight the fact in the likes of Cork, Limerick, and Dublin that, hey, I'm related to Ragnar Lothbrok. I'm related to Ivor the Boneless. Those families, they don't go away. Even today in Cork, you have the Coppers. The Coppers are a what was it called? An Irish family in Cork that do a lot of clothing and stuff. If you go to the center of Cork, you'll see Copper, and they go back. They've highlighted. They haven't touched our building since I think it's the 1860s. So the way it was built in the 1860s is exactly the way the Copper building is today, which does suit and ties. And they also have a picture of John F. K. One of their main photos is John F. K. going past the shop and stuff in the car and going out to talk and stuff to them, which is something they definitely highlight to them. But when they talk about their family history, they talk about their relationship going all the way back to the Hiberno Scandinavians and Ragnar Lothbrok. We're descended from Ragnar Lothbrok and stuff.
That's like Americans who claim descent from William the Conqueror. It's like, yeah, but like most Europeans at this point are descended from William the Conqueror.
So it is funny how once the English have kind of died out, because most people die from the plague within those city areas, you have those people who were knocked down a peg coming back up again, rising back up to take the
Right.
old jobs that they were running for years, and then highlighting that in the city areas. I was doing this job originally before you.
That is splendid. Talk about a pedigree.
Mm.
Right. So when people, the Middle Ages was colorful. We know it was from archaeological evidence, from documentary evidence. We have lots of dyeing manuals that talk about all the colors that can be achieved, right? We know that everyone was wearing colors from across all levels of society, all stratas. Now, the next thing that people always talk about when they talk about medieval society is that it was dirty. Clothing was dirty. People stank, right? We're not going to talk about bathing today. We're going to do a whole separate section on hygiene, teeth polishing for the win. So yeah, of course. And I think, Philip, you've been dealing with people talking about dirty clothing on your channel too.
Oh, I.
So, doing laundry, no, there's no people, I don't know what it is that modern people think we're so much different. We're so much better. We have different way of perceiving the world. I mean, yes, some of us, because of the kind of clothing we've grown up wearing, tight, restrictive clothing feels uncomfortable, which it wouldn't have to a medieval person. But I don't imagine that really 14th century people would like the feeling of grime and dirt all over their skin like that. I just can't imagine that would feel good to them either. And that they wouldn't feel good about clothing that's so dirty. Like I heard one myth that clothing in the Middle Ages was washed once a year when it reached the point that it was so stiff that you couldn't bend in it anymore.
Jeez, smell coming off. I'm like, that was another thing as well. Yeah, is the smell? Is the whole like, oh well, medieval people were always smelly.
I mean, yes, there are. I mean, even in the modern world, there are different tolerances for foul smells, right? If you come from a city like New York City in the summer, which stinks literally, or Delhi, or some of these bigger urban centers that just do not smell great, right? And you're used to that all the time. Yes, you will have a different perception of bad odors than someone who's from the fresh air in a countryside location, right? Yes, but that's not medieval versus modern. That's like your mileage will vary based on where you live. But that's not the same as the feeling of garments that are so encrusted with oil and dirt that they petrify on your body and you can't move anymore. And that's right. That's not going to feel good to anyone. No one will want that. Yeah, it's genuinely insulting to our ancestors. It really is. Yeah, Twitchy Witch, where do people get these myths? Man, I'm assuming that one might be a Victorian myth. Honestly, that sounds like the kind of hubris that the Victorians had about themselves and their superiority. Yeah, so, how do we know? We actually know people did laundry. One, we've got medieval representations of them doing laundry. Here is a woman in the 13th century happily doing her laundry by a river. She's got a beater, and you use that to literally beat the fabric in the water to help remove the stains, right? And you have fermented urine, and you actually use that. The beater beats into it, and that helps actually release the oils and the stains, so that you can then drape it on your grassy lawn, which are called bleach fields, starting in about the 18th century, I think. That term is not medieval. Sorry, everyone. Everyone brought up the term bleach field on my medieval laundry video. It's not a medieval English term. It's a term of industrialization, apparently. It was part of the industrialization process. Yeah, so laundry was absolutely done regularly. You just, and that's why I've harped on this a lot. This layer gets laundered regularly. It's why it's white. It's why you don't bother dyeing the layer that goes against your skin, because you're going to launder the hell out of it. And if you dye it, it's not going to stay dyed for very long, right? You dye the overlayers. These get spot treated. Wool doesn't need to be laundered, guys. It really doesn't. You can spot treat it. It airs out. It's very stain resistant. It's very smell resistant, and it's antimicrobial, right? You know, there's more than just a question of, well, wool is what they had, so they used it. No, it was also very practical. It's also flame retardant, which is really practical when you're working near a fire.
Handy when you want to sleep on a
Right?
fire.
Yeah. Like
Like my
I was
friends
going to
want to.
say, like no one ever does at modern reenactments. No, of course not. No one ever passes out after too much ale too close to the fire in their wool tunic.
Oh, I'm very sleepy there, lads. And then he just lies on the fire, and I'm like, oh Jesus Christ! And he doesn't go up on fire, and he's not the only one. The two lads did it. One lied on top, and then the other fella, I don't know if he was trying to be funny or what, lies on top of him, and they didn't catch fire. They rolled off of it, like, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, what is going on here, like? And this was, I think 3 in the morning or something, 3 or 4.
Thank God they were wearing authentic wool tunics and not what
I know,
many
right?
people who like LARPers or not more casual practitioners of living history who wear like things with petrochemicals in them, because there's a lot of wool blends out there, right? You might think it's wool, but it has nylon or polyester in it. That's still going to go up in
Yeah.
flames and it's going to melt in your skin and it's going to give you nasty, nasty chemical burns. Yeah.
It's the melting, which is
Oh, yeah.
absolutely horrific, especially when you see all the scars afterwards and they've got that melted burn into it. Like,
I mean,
what?
just to remove when your fabric melts and they have to remove it, it doesn't come away on its own. By the way, so yeah, petrochemicals are
Sounds
evil.
wonderful.
Don't wear them. Just don't. It's yeah.
I swear I'm not wearing anything like that now.
Avoid them, please, people, for your own safety. Yeah, so laundry was done regularly. They also had soap. They also had lye-based soap, so it wasn't just fermented urine that was being used. They had lye-based soap. There are manuals, entire manuals with treatments for every kind of stain you can imagine. And I've got a quote here from it. They had a technique for any kind of stain, and reading these, this is going to sound terrible, but reading manuals that have laundry recipes in them is fascinating because it tells you about how these people messed up their clothing, right? There's a story behind, or 20 behind every stain remedy. It's like how to get wine out of your fine silk gown. How did you get that much wine on your fine silk gown to start with? Aren't you supposed to be like this refined person who knows how to conduct themselves at a feast table, right? Like,
I'm not saying nothing.
right. So here is a 15th century stain treatment. And this also tells you like how scientific people, it's another thing, the medieval world wasn't scientific. It was all superstition, blah. Not true. Their science was based on a different system of science, but it was still scientific, right? So if there is any spot of oil or other grease, this is the remedy. Take urine and heat it until it is warm and soak the spot in it for 2 days. Now, the urine, it doesn't say fermented urine, but I'm going to assume it's probably fermented. If not, it will be fermented by the end of those 2 days. Then, without twisting it, squeeze out the part of the dress with the spot. If the spot is not gone, have Dame Agnes the Beguine. So apparently we need this one woman, the only woman in Europe who can help you. Dame Agnes the Beguine, put it in other urine, beat in ox gall, and do as before. Or you can do this. Have fuller's earth soaked in lye and then put it on the spot. Let it dry and then rub it. If the earth doesn't come off easily, have it moistened in the lye and then let it dry again and rub it until it goes away. So it's got, you see, we've got all these. If you don't have this, here's this option. If you don't have this, here's this option. If you don't have that, here's that option. So you don't come up with so many treatments for stains if you don't care about stains. Right? You don't, if you don't care, like that's the other thing, people just, their clothes got stained and they didn't care and they just walked around in nasty, dirty clothes. No, you've got just for treating grease or oil, you've got 5 different options here to make certain that, all your bases are covered. And I wish modern stain treatments on webs that you find on websites were this awesome, where they just don't assume that you're going to have the one thing they're talking about. And like, well, if you don't have this, then you can use this. And if you don't have that, there's this other option. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find similar sources for Irish, medieval Irish clothing at all. Have you encountered anything
Fair.
about laundry or laundry practices in medieval
Mm,
Ireland?
Not anything like that. It definitely must have happened because even when you go into when I was a child, back in the 90s, you have the grandmother, all the endless amount of wives' tales that she would have been told by her grandmother. Sorry, not grandmother, her own mother. And they would have, included, you use lemon here, you'd use, what was it, fizzy pop for that situation, you use this on the windows, all
Right,
that kind of stuff with the clothing and everything. So there must have been something like that going on, passed between mother to daughter, especially if they go into fosterage. So as we were saying there, sons being fostered into different homes to be trained how to use martial arts. You have the same thing happening with young girls who were fostered between the age of 7 to 14 to be taught how to
right.
be wives, and in that they would have had to be taught how to do the various bits and bobs. um what else do we bloody have?
I mean, have you like in any of
Um,
those? I think you were saying you were reading. There was a really good history book on the Fitzgeralds, the 15th century Fitzgeralds.
mm.
Did they?
You talking about
Yeah,
the
the Gerald. Yeah, was there
Geraldines
any
and
mention of
medieval
of
Ireland?
any of their laundering practices or anything like that in there?
Not that I've come across in this one, because this one's more focused on the historical of what the Geraldines got
Right.
into. So it's not even a book I would advise for clothing
Mhm.
or anything like that. You get like little bits and bobs just to show off the status. But when it comes down to the clothing part, but at the same time, I could imagine the ladies of the Fitzgeralds learning all those bits and bobs as well. So I do personally believe that it was taught, and that possibly at the time may have been
Right.
manuals for the likes of the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds, if they're not getting it from France as well, because there were Fitzgeralds inside of the French and English court, and then there was the odd person that made their way out to the likes of Florence and Peninsula and stuff. So there is
I mean,
connections there,
I
and
and also from when the Norse colonized, right? The Norse were exceeding another myth that Vikings were dirty. The Norse were
mm,
big on cleanliness, like
massively, yeah.
super big on cleanliness, and I can't imagine that the culture that if Ireland hadn't already been that way. I'm not saying it
Mm,
wasn't, but even if it hadn't already had that kind of culture, and I can't imagine it didn't, but the Norse would have absolutely brought in all of their bathhouses and their lye soap and their laundering practices.
yeah,
At,
but
yeah,
they were also mixing into the culture. So not only did you have cities, so coming into the 10th century, so in the 9th century, you have the original ports that were coming in, and they start bringing in massive amount of money. So then by the time you get into the 10th century, you don't have Scandinavians anymore.
right,
You have
right.
Hiberno Scandinavians. So
Mm,
you have, what was it, these ports that the Vikings had built, originally intended perhaps to do mercenary work and also raiding into rival factions in Ireland. They end up making so much money from trade,
right,
and that's because the Irish are kind of they kind of just don't take off with these monastic settlements and stuff. But when the Hiberno Scandinavians build these port areas, the Irish are turning that for to them for more and more trade. So
right,
these areas explode.
right,
And because this would have only been one or two generations of Scandinavian men coming in, married local Irish women, you've got more, because there's more demand for work. More Irish men and women are moving into these city areas,
right,
and so you end up having, as you said there, even if, what was it called, the Byzantine influences that were coming in, the Charlemagne influences were coming in, even if they didn't do before, they would have definitely done afterwards. But we do actually have, I'm sure it is, oh, who is it? It's one of the monks, because you also have the Saints' Lives that talk about batting a lot. And you
oh yeah,
also
that's
have
true.
in Munster, when they have a saint that comes down from the Enale territory over to Munster, and there's a disagreement, and they end up locking up the monk and stuff. They talk about him having a bat, and they talk about the because back then, if a noble was captured because negotiation wasn't going very well, they weren't putting him in a bin. They had to bat him and make sure he was well fed like a king. And so it's actually one of the greatest sources for what was it called? what they ate and how they dressed. Sorry, how they washed themselves in the medieval period because of the way this was a prisoner was treated. Well, he was a noble, like, so he wasn't going to be
Right,
treated
right.
like shy. And this is the funny thing. The reason why he gets into detail is they feed him, but then he complains that the food is terrible. He goes into the kitchen and makes his own food, which obviously the Munster men were absolutely offended about. But it goes into even more detail about the food in that story, which I cannot bloody remember the name of. Yuki would remember the name of, but it's gone out of my head right now. But yeah, they definitely, if you, and an even better example again is actually in Iona, you have the Saints' Lives of Columba, and in that he tells you why you need to have that washed. So a bucket is given to him, and he's inspecting the bucket. The bucket is dirty, and he talks about the demon that's now in the bucket. So he tells you that if you do not wash all this stuff, you will be possessed by a demon, and they believe this. And so the bucket is re-cleaned, and the demon is gone. You know. So it even goes into the details of why you wash yourself and why you clean the likes of buckets and various other objects you use for eating.
Right. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. It's a Pusterblume. Wer ist hier ja Amerikaner? Weißt du ja schon?
Mhm. What?
We have a German who just said Americans are funny people. Ja, der Philipp ist ja gar kein Amerikaner. Yeah, I just said who here is exactly American, and I told him you're not. Right. Okay.
What do you mean? I'm a New Yorker, aren't I?
Yeah, you totally
That's
sound
a
like
big
you're
New
from
York
Manhattan,
accent.
man. Manhattan socialite right there.
I know, right?
Yeah, so the laundry practices, not only was laundry regularly done, it's entirely its own profession, right? So you have professional laundresses whose whole job, all they do all week, every week, all day, every day is laundry. That's how much laundry is being done. And medieval expense accounts, 14th, 15th century expense accounts are full all across Europe, England, France, Scotland, the Scottish royal accounts, multiple Italian accounts are filled with laundry bills, right? For all kinds of garments, for white garments, for the spot treatment of overgarments, right? So laundry was a major medieval industry. And here you can kind of see the industrialization. These are laundry women working by a river, and you always tried to do laundry by the river because the rivers were known for having clean water, which should
Back
tell you
then.
that the myth of the dirty medieval river is just not true. Right? So they would work in the rivers, and that's where they would do the whites, particularly because the whites are done with water, whereas everything else is dry cleaned by medieval methods, not by modern methods. And they would boil the linen. You can see all the pots of water that are boiling, the big cauldrons. You've got all the buckets for scrubbing. You've got the table laid out where you can actually, beat the stains out of the fabric. And then they're hung up first to dry, as you can see on the top left there, on a rack that's been set up. But then after they reach a certain level of dryness, they're laid out on the grass. And I figured out why you would do this, why you would want to let it dry first. Because even though there's not going to be many grass stains, if you put wet garments straight onto the grass, they're more likely to actually develop grass stains.
Yeah.
If they're dried first, if they're sort of pre-dried and then laid out on the grass for bleaching, then you completely minimize the chance of grass stains. And I'd like to, Philip, do you remember me telling you why you would want to put your whites on the grass?
Help with the drying?
Because you could just let it dry on the rack. So grass emits oxygen as part of photosynthesis. That is, we exhale carbon dioxide, and plants exhale, basically, in layman's terms, they exhale oxygen. Oxygen helps remove stains. So you've got the sunlight coming down from above, hopefully, if you've got sun. You've got the sunlight coming down from above to, the UV light bleaches all manner of stains. But then the oxygen from the grass is also helping from below. And then, of course, you flip it. So you've got bleaching happening from both sides in two different methods. You've got oxygen bleaching on the grass side and UV bleaching from the top side. And apparently UV light will also get out the billibium in blood. That's the thing that
Oh.
actually stains. The UV light will actually fade that out. And so if you get blood stains on your garments, guys, ladies and gentlemen, for whatever cause, maybe you're into street fighting, I don't know, lay it out in the sunlight, and the sunlight will eventually fade the blood stain. It will also fade the colored, any dye stuffs, mind you, 100%. But that's why you're only supposed to treat white garments this way, because if you do this to dyed garments, you're literally killing the dye with the UV light. So
Yeah, it's very interesting. Just answered the question there. If you're, I don't know about Paris, to be quite honest with you, why people would consider the rivers dirty in Paris, but in Ireland and Britain, it's because there was nuclear waste in the 1960s that spilled into the water, and that's why our bloody water is so it has to be filled with so much chlorine and stuff in Britain and Ireland. There was a huge leakage in the 1960s up in the north part of England, and it caused all of the rivers and everything, because of the going into the rain and stuff. It caused all the rivers and everything in both Ireland and Britain to become very, very dirty.
right.
And then people just assumed that the water, like 2025 now, people assume that water in Britain or Ireland was always dirty.
Right.
And like it's still dirty today. Like I would tell people, like especially foreigners that come into Ireland and stuff, don't drink from our river water in Ireland. It's full of nuclear waste and stuff, which is wild to talk about, but it's true, because of the leakage in the north of England. And this is where I'm going into the controversial side, because they still reckon that that plant is still leaking because of experiments they're doing recently and stuff. So water in Britain and Ireland is still filthy, like, and never mind all the waste that gets dumped in there, because I think they were saying in parts of America around New York and stuff, sorry, not New York, California and stuff, and it's the same thing happening over in Asia as well. Plastic is being found in a lot of the rivers
Microplastics,
and
it's
stuff.
terrible, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Pustabluma, Philip is from Ireland and I am from America originally, but we're now both in Eastern Asia. So we are expats, expat medievalists in Eastern Asia. Yeah, I think my feeling on the rivers is that probably in the second industrial revolution, the one that everyone calls the industrial revolution, I think is probably because, as Hans said, there was an industrial revolution absolutely in the Middle Ages, and especially following the Black Death, when you have all these people die off, suddenly you need machinery to fill in the labor gaps, right? So people get innovative about devising machines that can cover what was done literally manually before. But my feeling is that it's really as the cities become increasingly industrialized. So probably, starting probably in the 16th century, 17th, and then by the 18th and 19th centuries, especially with all the factories using the rivers as their personal dumping bins. Right. I think that's probably really where it comes in. I mean, certainly probably in downtown London, maybe you wouldn't want to use the Thames as your washing station. Probably not. If you notice, these ladies are not in the city. They're out in the part of the river that's out in the country, right? So you're far enough out that any city detritus has been filtered out, right? It's no longer there. But, just because the Thames in London is polluted doesn't mean the Thames all along is polluted. Same thing for the Liffey, the Arno, right? All of these, one part can be polluted with, human waste and that kind of thing. And that doesn't mean that the whole thing is.
Yeah. The only thing I would find annoying about these poor women is they have to deal with the Irish rain if this was done in Ireland, like where it's constly on the go. Like you just barely get the laundry out and then suddenly it's bloody raining again.
It might, God knows. It'd be interesting if anyone has done studies about medieval weather patterns in Ireland, right? Because the weather patterns in medieval Europe weren't the same. Well, I'm not even today. Comparing them against today is absolutely not a good comparison because we live in a crazy climate world. But say 40 years ago, the weather patterns from 40 years ago were not the same as they were in the 1340s. Were not the same they were in the 1440s even, because there's a little ice age coming on.
Yeah. That's actually quite interesting because I remember my grandmother actually talking about, well, it didn't rain this much when I was a small girl. So actually, maybe you're right there. Like maybe you hit something.
Maybe it wasn't always the way it wasn't. I mean, Ireland now isn't quite as rainy as it used to be, and God knows England isn't.
But I also do wonder as well, like there must have been some form of this in Ireland because if you look at the fishermen, there's loads of history of the fishermen coming out, and then when the fish came in, the women organizing the fish, working with the men, and then even gutting the fish and so on and so forth. Both in around actually where I'm from, in Kildare, you have loads of fishing coming in, and so the women are working as a group with the fish, and also over in was it the islands, you have loads of groups of women again, the islands between Scotland
Right,
and Ireland, up around there. You have women working again as a group, working with the fish
right,
as it comes in, because they have all. If you watch the videos on them, they have entire songs and poems that they would sing in rhythm while they're doing their various tasks
right.
and
Yeah, I've
stuff.
seen I've seen I've seen
And
some
that's why it's
videos about
documented.
that. Um,
Yeah,
so, the thing is, people ask me, that was actually a question I got, was whether we have evidence of medieval working songs, and I haven't found any,
yeah,
unfortunately. So I'm
I
not, I mean,
know.
I'm not saying they didn't exist. I just have not, I haven't, now granted, I haven't done like a deep dive into all extant songs and songbooks from the medieval period, but I haven't encountered any even mention of them, say in chronicles or sources. Again, I haven't done it as a deep dive. I just haven't personally found evidence of working songs in the medieval period. Doesn't mean they didn't
Yeah,
exist. I
because
just haven't
these.
found proof positive for it.
Yeah. Although the words went missing, we have "Follow Me to Carlow," which is a medieval song from around 1570. It's a battle song sung by the O'Brien. Was it the O'Briens, down in the just out of Dublin? The O'Briens are settled there, and they have a battle march song called "Follow Me to Carlow," which has that kind of do 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 do, that kind of rhythm song of marching and stuff. So if they have songs like that for marching, for military and stuff, they must have songs as well, working songs for people working in the
Right,
fisherland and stuff, because it reappears then around the 1800s and stuff when it's documented. But I think at the time, like the 17th century and stuff, unless it was something special, people were kind of putting these things in the. They would just kind of like teach it to their child, but they weren't documenting or writing this down. Like in Ireland, it's not until we get up to the 20th century with Eamon de Valera and his wife. His wife turns around and says, "Oh, maybe we should document all this stuff." Then you have all this document of the folklorists who then go out to the rural parts of Ireland and they just outright document it. And it's then when they discover so much stuff. For example, if you're looking at the superstition around the likes of the Banshee
right,
and the Morgan, they go to a local spot and they're like, oh wait, this Banshee, it's spelled differently and they have a slight different belief to the Banshee that's over in
right.
the other village. It's then in around the 1940s, 1960s at this point, that they're finding all these little interesting things that one Banshee is completely different to
Right.
another Banshee, bits and
My
bobs like
my
that.
banshee's better than your banshee.
That's exactly it.
I
Like,
mean,
yeah,
so I always tell people, um, it's almost insulting to our ancestors to assume that nothing has changed in 500 years, right? That's an
mm,
insult to human innovation. That's
yeah,
not how humans work.
mm,
So I
yeah,
never assume that anything that is traditional now, just because it's out in a rural area, doesn't mean it's been that way for 600 years. So and
yeah,
song and dance, those evolve really quickly, faster than people would like to believe.
mm,
Like, you can tell from dance, and the evidence we have of dance and music in the Middle Ages is you can absolutely hear a difference, a clear difference between 14th century music, between 15th century music, between 16th century music. And the dances change entirely to the point where the vocabulary describing the same word describes a completely different step from the 15th to the 16th century. So I would never
mm.
ever assume that something that appears in 1570 is the same as it was in 1470. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Because even the words are missing. The problem with "Follow Me to Carlo" is that it's a modern interpretation of a medieval song. So although the song was passed down, the words are missing. Like all you
Oh,
have left is basically even, yeah. So the rhythm, like the constantly argued, the rhythm is the same. So we have the rhythm that's documented, but the words are missing. They all had to be added back in there around. What was it, the early 20th century? The words got added
right,
back in again. So you're bang on right. So it only gives us like this keyhole look that we can look in and see what's
right.
inside. But on top of that, like that, what I said there about the fisherman songs, that's me assuming. Okay, so if we've got battle march songs from the what was it, the 16th century, then we must have had fishermen songs to go with that, because if there are people of rhythm, they must have been
I
creating
mean,
these
maybe,
songs.
yeah, it could be. I always like to talk about
Mm,
proof positive, right? I like to always focus about what we know rather than what we don't
that's
know.
true.
Um,
Yeah.
so, it's like I always say it could be, but I just don't have the evidence for it. And the thing is that
Mm,
even if they had working songs, and humans like to sing, we love to sing. So there's no reason that they couldn't have. We have no idea how they could have sounded, right? Zero.
mm,
Absolutely
very
none.
true. Which hurts my
Right.
feelings.
And a lot of people say, well, this is traditional Irish music, so it must date back thousands of years. No, that's an insult to the Irish as an innovative
Yeah.
and creative people, actually.
Mm.
Good question. Irish trod dance. How old is that dead arm stuff? I doubt it's medieval. So,
Oh, definitely not
Seamus,
medieval.
my friend, yeah,
Yeah,
no.
because
um,
the problem with the dead arm is that I'm sure Seamus will probably correct me on this one. What was it called? It doesn't it only appear around the
yeah,
1800s or so,
there's
where people
there
start
is
to
no
put their
evidence for
shoulders
dead arm
together.
dancing, and it's so Irish
Mm,
traditional dance, traditional is in quotes, is like it's not a social dance form, right? It's not for like so you don't need your arms to actually connect to your fellow person, whereas almost all
mm.
forms of social dance involve holding hands or arms or embracing and connecting
Yeah,
in some way, right? You can't have dead arms and do
because
that. So
yeah, because my understanding of, and Seamus will probably correct me on this again, is it wasn't it the Normans that brought in the first lot of the Irish dancing that we know today? I don't know what the Gaelic dancing looked like, the native Gaelic dancing, and they must have had dancing as well. But I'm sure the evolution of the Irish dancing we know today actually comes from the old French that was brought in around
so
1160. What was it,
so
1169?
yeah, so the Normans, we know nothing about how they danced. Zero. We have
Yeah.
names, and sometimes we have music. So we know
Mm,
names of dances that are mentioned before the 15th century, but we know absolutely
yeah.
nothing, and I mean nothing, about how the dances actually moved, because there are no dance
Mm,
manuals before 1440, basically, anywhere in
yeah.
Europe. Anywhere in Europe. And I mean Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Northern, Southern, doesn't matter. If any of you know of a dance manual before the 15th century, please reach out to me, because that would literally revolutionize the study of historical dance. Really. So we don't know
Mm,
what those we know we have like images of people, not so much of the 12th century. We some of the 12th century, but it's usually depicting biblical dancing, like Old Testament dancing. So who knows how realistic that is actually. But there's occasionally like a picture of a knight with two ladies dancing, and then it's usually the knight is in the center and he has a lady on each hand and they're standing side by side, right? And
mm,
that's like 12th, late 12th, 13th, 14th century French. We have depictions of people dancing in long lines, holding hands, right? One after the other after the
mm,
other. Um, Couples dancing as a couple seems to maybe be a kind of revolution in Europe anyway, at least in Germany, because in 1407 a law is passed in Ulm, in the city of Ulm, that forbids couples dancing just two people, on
mm.
pain of a fine of 7 shillings. So it could be that the idea of just two people dancing together holding hands could be revolutionary in the 15th century. We
Mm.
don't know, because the evidence before these dance manuals is kind of scant, is very scant. And so I couldn't, anyone who claims they know about the evolution of dance in Ireland is either hiding a lot of information that they need to share, or they're making shit.
You know, right? Because bloody hell, I think a lot of Norman historians would bloody go wild if they got hold of any manuscripts like that. You see, the thing is that we're only assuming that it comes from the Hiberno branch, is because that's the area that we're kind of, evolving with the Irish dancing, like places like Mallow, where I'm from, where you have like the reeks of Mallow and all that kind of stuff. That's where it's kind of evolving from. But as you said there, because I did the research into Irish
Right.
dancing a few years back, and I couldn't work out what the Hiberno Normans were dancing like when they had come over around, what was it, when they were
Yeah.
eventually settled. They came over around 1169, and then they didn't really properly settle until about 1224. And even on top of that, it's not like they just suddenly stopped mixing with the French and the English, when you had the likes of the rise of the Anjou and stuff. Because William Marshall and his wife and stuff are still going to France and England, so you still have that French influence going in there. But as you hammered down there, like, how are they dancing in France in that period in 1224? I
Right.
don't know. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's
you
we
know?
have names of dances, and we know from the Arthurian romances, and from also from epics and sagas that they say, and they danced. Well, that's it. And they danced. Doesn't say how they danced.
Well, like,
Doesn't
good for
say,
them.
right? It doesn't say what they danced. It tells us
Yeah.
nothing other than we know that they did. And we don't know if it, from that context, you don't know, is it a social dance? Is it some kind of ceremonial thing? Is it men and women mixed? Is it unisex? Is it just women or just men? Is it a line? How long does it go? What are their feet doing? Like, we don't know. So,
Yeah, you see, this is the problem, because we always, in especially the Irish castles and stuff, if you're talking about the 13th century, we imagine them in their Moat and Bailey castle in Kilkenny, William Marshall there, happy out with Isabel de Clare, and then having Irish dancers come in and doing their old jig and stuff. And it's like, we don't know if that happened like
I
that
doubt
at
it.
all. Like,
And so here's the thing.
Yeah.
If chroniclers love to chronicle weird shit. Okay. So when they go to a place that is foreign to them, or any place, and they see something that is exotic, strange, or foreign, they write about it every time. Which is why we actually know some of the things we know about 14th and 15th century Irish clothing habits, because these foreigners come in and they're like, they're not wearing socks. Why aren't they wearing socks? They're not wearing brays.
Yeah.
What are they wearing? They're not wearing brays. Underpants. Why aren't they wearing underpants? Right? Because to them, that's strange. So the second they see something odd, they make note of it, because they know that's going to make for good copy, right? Their patron is going to want to read about this weird crap. So if something like that had happened, if these strange exotic dancers had come and performed before William Marshall and Isabel de Clare, someone would have noted it. Right. A member of his retinue would have noted it, and it would have made its way back. It would have made the rounds. Right. And I just haven't seen that kind of evidence for it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's painful, because I, especially myself, I love promoting that whole Irish tourism, as you guys were saying there, river dance. People love the high middle age, that image, and every single time we go to a high middle ages show, we have some figure that represents as William Marshall and Isabel de Clare at the very top with their William Marshall shield, and then Riverdance coming out and doing their little jig, and it makes a lot of money from a tourism perspective. That's why we want to have the evidence there, but the evidence isn't there to make the money out of.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not there. Irish step dancing doesn't date back very far as we can tell, Susan. I mean, I think so. The earliest reference I personally know for it, I think, is in the 18th century.
Yeah, I'm the same as well. I think step dancing, because isn't Irish step dancing then influenced by American step dancing at the same time
you mean
as
tap
well?
dancing? I mean, the modern stuff is. So God, yes. The river dance, that's completely heavily influenced by tap dancing. But the original Irish step dancing, the theory that I know is that it actually evolved out of the Galliard. So the Galliard was a dance that was popular in the 16th century. It was highly athletic. It was a lot of kicking and bouncing and jumping and caprioling, and it was a solo dance form. So, anyone could just get up and do it like a crazy, it was especially popular amongst like drunk students. You'll be shocked to hear that. And so the theory that I've read is that actually Irish step dancing, when the Galliard made its way to Ireland, kind of localized, right? And also the same way with a lot of things with Ireland, once something comes to Ireland, they tend to hold on to it longer than everyone else. Like Ireland Ireland is strange. Like it will evolve while also holding on to this old thing, right? Like, so you've got this parallel kind of fashion, music, food development where yes, we've got this new thing and we really love to innovate, but also why get rid of the old thing? We can do them both at the same time.
Yeah, it's great.
So the
Yeah,
theory that I've
I
read
love the
is that
Irish.
Irish step dancing evolves out of the galliard. But when it
Mm,
actually transitions from being what a dance historian would recognize as the Italian, French, Flemish, English galliard into what is very recognizable as Irish step dancing, I couldn't tell you. That's a theory I've heard.
mm.
I haven't really looked into post 1600 dance very that deeply. So yeah.
Mm.
The women are not wearing anything
That's a
on their
new
chests
thing.
in Cork in 1415. Oh, are you joking, Seamus? Is that what that little that funny face after that is? Yeah. For certain women in Cork are wearing things on their chest in 1415. Jesus.
Isn't that the bloody that bloody dress called that's in
The
Clare?
Moy
That's the one
gown?
that's dominant in the
The
fashion
Moy
of that
gown.
part. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's dominant in
Yeah, yeah. So
1450, isn't it?
they
Yeah, that
they
has a
think,
chest
yeah,
part,
yeah.
isn't it?
It's like this. It's a dress like this,
Yeah,
basically similar anyway.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's so dates. They think it dates to the 14th century, but they haven't they
Mm.
haven't carbon dated it. So
Oh, right, yeah,
right.
well,
So Seamus says there's buck a buck leaping dance in the rural areas of the past. Big in Meath, I think once. Yeah, so buck leaping sounds a lot like the Galliard. So in the Galliard,
mm,
there's this fun game called the tassel kicking game where you actually have a tassel on the end of a rope. And there's a special, stupidly complex step you have to do to kick the tassel, which involves pivoting in midair. And they actually raise the tassel higher and higher. And the person who can finally
mm.
kick, the last person kicking, is the winner and actually gets a prize or something. So talk about the
Oh, nice.
ultimate drunk
I like that.
student game. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, nice, nice. And what's the story with the Book of Burgundy?
Which Duke of Burgundy book? Could you be more specific? The Dukes of Burgundy were
Leaping.
notorious bibliophiles, and which Duke of Burgundy?
All right.
Yeah, Buck Lepping. I'm pretty certain Lepping is the then spelling of leaping.
All right, which the Irish always bloody
Right.
love, don't
Yeah.
they? Bum, bum, bum. It's the same with the Morris dancing. The vast majority
Let,
of modern Morris dancing in the
let's see.
18th
Seamus says, I always
century.
feel
That's
Irish
great.
people have a fantasy that cultural content is way older than it really is, and this underlines that for me. Yeah, I think it's not just Ireland. The Spanish, like every people in Europe, respectively, think that their traditional culture is way older than it is. The people in Brittany think that the women have been wearing that exact style of headdress for hundreds upon hundreds of years, and it's just not true. that it dates
Yeah.
to the Middle Ages, and it's just not true. Right? The Spanish think that their traditional clothing dates to the Middle Ages, and it's just not true. So it's not just Ireland.
Mm,
Ireland is not the only culprit here. Yeah. I think America
yeah.
is the only
It's
one who
always the case.
doesn't think its culture is very old and doesn't care.
Yeah. But it's always then funny then when what was it, Ireland and Japan do something from the 19th century, and then America turns around and says, "Hey, wait, that's not traditional. What are you doing?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
"What? Can I not do that thing 100 years
Yeah,
ago?
well, oh,
No."
so one of my one of my family members posted a picture of him and his best buddy in kilts for St. Patrick's Day.
Mm,
And, right? And I
there, another
commented,
one.
"Hey,
Yeah.
that's not really Irish, right?" And because it's not originally, right? It's
They tried though. Patrick Pearse tried with was it the Gaelic revival in the what was it, the early
right.
20th century. He was doing all these pageantries and stuff where he was wearing a saffron
Yeah.
kilt and stuff, and he was trying
Yep.
to bring it in. But I don't know, it just
Yeah,
never
well,
clicked. It
they're
never
they're they're
clicked.
convinced it's Irish, and I'm like, no, it's definitely originally Scottish and not that old. But also, his best buddy then
Yeah.
came back with the most solid counter argument ever to a actual professional fashion historian, being me. He used
Mm.
ChatGPT to tell him that the kilt is a traditional Irish garment and has been dyed saffron for hundreds of years, dating back to the ancient Celts.
God, that's really manipulating
Oh my God.
ChatGPT. I can see
And
all the
he
manipulation
actually
there.
came back serious. Like, look, maybe you should read before you make stupid posts. Like he literally said that to me. And I was like, oh wow, you're so dumb.
Oh
I'm not even gonna
wow.
waste any more time on you. If you think ChatGPT is gonna
Oh
give you an
wow.
accurate answer on any topic, you deserve what you get, buddy.
Yeah. But as you said there, like I've been tartan's another one I always try to go after because it's so good for tourism and stuff. And yet Rachel would tear it apart in a second because tartan's not always the peak of fashion in medieval Ireland. Like you'll see little until about I can't remember when James makes it fashionable. I think it's somewhere around the 1570s or something. I can't remember when tartan was at the peak of fashion in Scotland. But there is, for the most of Scottish and Irish history, tartan never gets to the peak of fashion the way it does. I'm sure it's the
17th
16th century or something
for
for a
tartan,
while.
it's 17th century.
17th,
Yeah,
yeah, there you
it's a
go.
Jacobite
Okay,
thing, right?
there you go.
It's not
Yeah.
definitely not no not the peak of fashion
Mm.
in Europe in the 16th anywhere in Europe in the
Because
16th century.
I'm sure what happens is that tartan is so it's not fashionable. I think what happens is it becomes fashionable for a short period of time within the
Yeah,
nobility, and then it goes into this
right.
tradition level. And then after the Jacobite level, when that tradition was, it looks like it was about to die down, then it gets associated with the Jacobites, and then
Yeah,
it becomes somewhat immortal. And then going into the Victorian period, when the Victorians are rewriting all of bloody history, the Victorians are like, hey, wait, we were always Celtic people. And then they make the kilt fashionable. And that's when they literally invent the kilt with
right. Yeah.
tartan. Because at that point, tartan had been remembered as a very Scottish Celtic thing. And then you had that whole fashion kicking around all over the place. That if you were, a native born
Right.
Celtic person of the Victorian Empire, then you would have had a tartan and a kilt. And then they tried to bring that wave over to Ireland with Padraig Pearson stuff. And I don't know why, it just didn't click. It was called the
Yeah,
Celtic
the Celtic
Revival.
revival, right?
And yeah, a lot of stuff did click, but that whole kilt and tartan in Ireland itself, it didn't click. It did actually click somewhat in America to a certain degree, but it just outright just
Well,
didn't click in Ireland,
I will tell you that a
except
lot
for
of
the
Americans
bagpipers.
on St. Patrick's Day are out there in their oh so Irish kilts, and I'm just shaking my
Mm.
head. Yeah,
Like I have no problems with it, and it does bring in. It gives us a very good excuse to talk about tunics in Ireland and Scotland in the era. Like it's brought in. Like anytime I bring in the topic of kilt, I even purposely use the word kilt. God, my viewership jumps up. Like it's so good for shorts. It's so good for tourism. So I don't go against people talking about the kilt, but I like to kind of elaborate on that to talk about the usage of the Irish cloaks, actual
right,
traditional cloaks of that era, and also tunics, how tunics look like kilts to especially children. During the periods of the medieval era, all the way up to the early 20th century, where children are still wearing tunics with
right,
no pants on.
right.
I think that's a
Yeah.
great excuse to be using all that stuff. But it's nice to do those corrections and stuff. And if people want to wear kilts from the interpretation of the 20th century for Irish and Scottish tradition and stuff, yeah, I've no problems with that as well. So ultimately, I think it's grand as long as people understand the references of it.
Yeah,
Like,
nobody does though. Well, maybe not. Maybe at least the people in America definitely don't understand the references. They think
yeah.
they're wearing some ancient
Well,
Celtic
hey,
garment, right?
it still brings in my views. You see, it still brings in my views. This is why it still. Do you know the kilt wasn't actually worn in the
It was
14th century? Boom, my
right,
views jumping up. I
exactly.
can already
The
feel as I'm
second,
saying it,
exactly.
the
Like, oh,
views
look,
going
we're up
up.
to 65 viewers. Yeah, so a comment, Maximiliano says in Spain, nobody thinks their traditional suits come from the Middle Ages. Oh, that's not true. I've lived in Spain and talked to people who really literally say that, their flamenco outfits, for instance, reflect some kind of weird medieval tradition. Yeah, you might not know
Mm.
anyone who says that, but I've met them personally, and they're Spanish, living in Spain at this current time. So not everybody, I'm not saying the whole country does, but there will always be people in any given country who thinks that their traditional attire dates back centuries upon centuries. It's just every country, it's true. Every country I've traveled to, I've run into all of those people because I'm always talking when I travel, and I travel a lot. I always meet people and I talk to them about their traditional clothing, their traditional dance. etc. And they always, I hear time and time again, this traditional dance dates back to the Middle Ages. This music dates back to the Middle Ages. This clothing dates back to the Middle Ages, right? I hear it again and again and again. So it's not, I'm not making this up, guys. Personal experience. You can't tell me I haven't been told that, because I have. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Instead, as Seamus pointed out there, we should definitely do more on the brat, the cloak in Ireland. I was doing last year, was it not last year? Years back now, 2018. You can't believe that's so long ago. What was it called? I was at any of the living history events I was doing. I was doing the fringe of my cloak, and the amount of people that were stopping to talk about fringing of cloaks and how their grandmother used to fringe their cloak and stuff blew my mind. Like Irish people, there is definitely in Ireland a solid tradition. Now, if you were to talk to someone from this what was it, generation and above, they wouldn't have a clue about fringing and cloaks. But the amount of people from my age all the way back that talked about how when their grandmothers used to be next to the fire fringing their cloak, it just blew my mind. Every single one of them stopped to have a chat with me. They would talk about the good old days. Like, I haven't seen someone fringe a cloak in so long, they would say to me, and it was amazing to do that. So where in Ireland we don't really have a tradition to do with the kilt, when it comes down to cloaks, I definitely do believe Ireland has a tradition there. Like,
yeah. I mean, and I think it's so. I said this, I'm pretty certain I said this in the video I did for your channel on Gaelic Irish clothing in the 14th and 15th century. It's very dangerous to assume that the brat is one garment, unchanging, always the same over 1,000 years of history. I don't believe that in the least. I believe that it absolutely changed and evolved to suit the respective weather conditions, its respective functions, the new incoming fabrics and options and trims and things that are being imported, right? So, I think it would be very dangerous to say this is the traditional brat. Okay, well, no, there's a brat in this century, there's one in that century, there's one in this century, there's one in that century. Pick your century, focus on the evidence from that century, and then create a reasonable reconstruction. Like, again, it's insulting to the Irish to assume that they're just going to hold on to the same old thing and no one's ever going to change anything about it for 1,000 years.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that one, because the cloak I was working on was an early medieval one, and it was very much, you see, it's strange because I was just doing experimental archaeology with that one, because the cloaks that we have in the literature have no fringe. And so all of the what was it called? Literature constantly, the written literature talks about fringing happening over and over and over again, that they were getting our cloaks and fringing it. And I'm like, but there's no fringes on these cloaks from the England. Maybe you can correct me on that one, but I couldn't find in the pictures any fringing
they're never
work
depicted
done.
with fringing. Now, what
Yeah,
I think people are again, language is hard. It's hard to use a word
yeah,
to describe a visual accurately. Actually, a picture is worth 1,000
yeah.
words. It's a cliche because it's true. So what I think, understanding as I do now the weaving method, the production method of Irish wool, this thing that's so unique that it's being exported to places in Europe as a luxury item, right? So I
Yeah.
think that what they're interpreting or trying to describe as fringe is the woolly one side of the brat is it seems one of the things that seems to connect all along. Anytime I find a description of the brat, often it's described as being woolly, and that doesn't mean that it's made of wool. Obviously, it's woolly in the sense of like a
Yeah.
sheep's, like it's kind of got curls, right? It's got these curls of wool that add to its warmth and to sort of a luxury pile. Like it's almost kind of like a sort of natural sort of velvet, but velvet is different. But so I think that woolly pile that along the edges where there's an edge of the garment probably just creates this kind of curly effect. And that is what is actually the fringe. My theory is that is the fringe that is being described, that you can actually see some of the
Yeah.
curly pile on the one side, from the one side of the brat, kind of peeking out on the edges like this, right? And so that could
That's
create a
interesting.
kind of fringe effect. And that it's just, that lack of the paucity of language to be able to describe this concept, that the author therefore uses the closest word they have to hand.
Yeah. You see, I'd have to do more experimental archaeology when it comes down to the 15th century, because I was looking at it from an early medieval perspective, and then I was looking at the pictures we do have of cloaks, and then I was like, okay, it was Yuki and Rose. I was having a chat about this, and Rose was just like, how about you tablet weave the edge of it, and then you just what was it called? As we were talking about the other day.
Finger
Oh,
loop
what's that
braid?
technique called? You know, when loop it, yeah, loop in the fringes into the what was it called, into the cloak itself. And that's what I did. I haven't fully finished it because it takes bloody hours to do it, because you get the bone
Right.
needle, and then you just keep doing it over and over again. And that's what I was actually doing it. And so I was doing that at events and stuff, and I had people coming up to me and talking about the Galway shawl, and you know, the whole link with the cloaks from the, what was it, the 20th century and stuff. And it was blowing my mind, the amount of people that were telling me that's how their grandmother actually got in the fringe of the Galway shawl when they were little kids and stuff. And I was like, what? Really?
And that
That's
would actually
wild. Now that's in
that
the
would
Cork
track with
area.
the development of trims as of the 16th century. So that could be an
Mm,
absolute, it wouldn't surprise me if that's a post-medieval development. So in the 16th
yeah.
century across Europe, you see this sudden super evolution of trims. Before,
Mm,
you have tablet weaving, you have ankle loop weaving, you've got finger loop braiding, and suddenly there's like a million other techniques that come into play, including bobbin lace, including all sorts of new ways to create trims to go onto garments. And so it wouldn't surprise me if that technique that you're talking about evolved as a way to incorporate these new kinds of trims into their what you call a shawl, right? But is in
mm.
essence, I mean, if you think about what is a shawl, it's a big shawl is really just a kind of cloak, right?
Yeah.
So
But
yeah.
that's what I mean. We Ireland, although the cloak never kicked off. Sorry, not the cloak. The kilt never kicked off the way it did with the Victorian Empire. The cloak definitely, there's definitely some kind of tradition there, because the fact that you could show a cloak to someone of my mother and grandmother's generation, and then suddenly all their brain goes wild about all this
Right.
stuff and their interpretation of it. There's definitely some kind of tradition there in Ireland when it comes down to that sort of stuff. Just a question in my comment section. What was it, Rachel? Can you elaborate
Oh
about
yeah.
your
So
background
everyone,
again? I know
this
you did it
is
earlier.
a unfortunately you're too close to see the whole thing. This is La Dame, this is
Oh
La
no.
Dame à la Licorne. It's one of the tapestries that are in the Musée de Cluny. And this is the lady, you can see unicorn, unicorn, lady, and this is the sense of hearing, right? So these were all an allegory of this, of the five senses. So because she's playing a portative organ, this is the sense of hearing. And I have all of these. I've
Mm,
got reproduction. This is a reproduction. It's a proper tapestry. It's not wallpaper or anything like that. It's actually wool and linen. This one is silk screened. It's woven in a tapestry weave, but it's silk screened on top, which was, it's basically hand painted about 60 years ago. So yeah, I
mm.
have I have the whole collection. I have all of the ladies and the unicorns. Yeah, so actually Seamus brings up a good question. What word do they use for the fringe? And that, yeah, so that always speaks to my linguist heart, right? What is the original word that is used? Who has interpreted it into fringe being a modern English word, right? So that is you probably don't know what word, what the word is in the
Yuki just came in the door, so we could bully Yuki. Yuki, do you know the old
I
Irish
mean,
word for
what
fringe,
is the word they're
perhaps?
using to describe the cloaks as fringe? That's what matters.
Or is it? Oh, she'll have to look it
Yeah,
up
so that's, yeah,
afterwards.
that's Seamus.
Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it.
That is a very, very valid point, right? So we have the same problem
Mm,
in 15th century Italian, actually. We have the word fringe,
mm,
it pops up, the Italian word that is translated as fringe crops up a lot
mm.
in the 15th century text. It even appears in dance instructions. The word for fringe appears in dance
Nice.
instructions. So how do we interpret that to a movement that you're doing with your feet? Right. So
Mm,
yeah, it's really tricky when you're using a dead language or a dead version of a language, because old
mm.
Irish is nothing like modern Irish, right?
Yeah, I keep telling this to people like when they're
It's,
doing corrections at me. I'm
it's
like, but
not.
that's still not the
Yeah.
right correction. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I actually got it right,
That's not the point.
but
Yeah.
also their version of modern Ulster Irish, which is always bloody modern Ulster Irish. But anyway, their interpretation of modern Ulster Irish is different to the old Irish. But I'm not saying I'm right at the same time. Like I'm just saying this, they're also wrong.
Yeah, yeah. I was about to say Seamus. I don't know how that's pronounced in Irish, but the word you say there, the second one, that looks like a loan word from. Well, it looks like a loan word from the French, actually.
Mm,
Yeah. So the question is, in the original sources, where we're assuming a fringed garment is described, what is the word they're using, and what did it actually mean at the time? That's always
mm.
that's always super tricky.
Yeah, yeah. Buzz was going to bloody bombard you with. Oh, the shoes. They were asking about shoes in the comment section. Can you see the
Oh, hold
comment
on a
on the
minute. Let's
shoes
see.
there? Bum,
Scroll
bum,
up.
bum, bum.
Scroll up.
Oh yeah, it was just after. When I watch videos on Ireland and Scotland and what it was like before, I often do find
Ah,
myself wondering about the
right.
shoes. Good, you asked us because God, the
Oh my
level of myths
God.
out there.
So,
So
so
the
bad.
problem is that people see interpretations and also photos of Irish people in the
Yeah.
countryside in the mud with their
Yeah.
shoes taken off, and they assume all Irish people were poor
With them.
with no shoes. And I'm like,
No.
no, they took their shoes off to not
Yeah,
get
like
muddy.
you just yeah.
Um,
So for if before is a big time. Before now is thousands of years. So
mm,
let's narrow that down a little bit to
yeah,
the later part of the Middle Ages. We have extant shoes found in the mud, in the bogs, in the peat
yeah,
bogs, preserved from say
mm,
there's one pair I think of right offhand is from the 13th century, and they're beautiful leather
yeah,
shoes. They're turn shoes, and if I'd realized we were going to have shoe questions, I would have brought a pair. I have a pair out in the hallway, which means they're
yeah,
leather. What we might look at them and think, oh, that's a slipper. It's not though. They're
mm,
sewn inside out and then they're turned right side out. And they're very foot fitting, right? They kind of follow the shape of the foot with a kind of a minor point. They can be worked, so you can have like nice little patterns incised into the leather or stamped into the leather. They even in Ireland they could be dyed different colors, so you not just brown or black. I mean red or blue or green. You can dye leather all kinds of colors. We have medieval dyeing manuals that
mm.
specifically talk about how to dye leather, so we know they did it. Um, so yeah, medieval. It seems that the shoes that were being worn in Ireland are basically exactly the same as the shoes being worn everywhere else. In fact, we have that picture of the mayor of
Yeah.
Waterford up here, or Cork. It might be Cork. Honestly, I'll be honest. It's either Waterford or Cork or
Yes,
Limerick. I don't
Waterford.
remember which. But here you go. So this is 1378. One of the one of the four big Irish cities of the 14th century. One of the mayors. So Cork, Waterford, Limerick, or Dublin. Right. It could be one of those
Mm,
four mayors. And you can see his shoes here, right? He's got blue and red party colored shoes, and they've got that long point. And they would have a flat sole. There wouldn't be a heel on them. They could buckle, or they could have latches, like little laces that you tie. Not laces like we know, not like cross hatches like on sneakers, just one spot where there's lacing. And
mm,
this is a fashionable pair of shoes. This is obviously probably not what peasants were wearing to work in the bogs or
yeah.
farm. Their shoes probably didn't have those points that attenuated, but they, same idea. So that we also know they had wooden overshoes in Dublin. I found a pair from the 15th century. So these would be platforms, like massively platformed, like
Mm.
5 inches. They're pretty tall, these pair that I found. And you would wear those over top of your leather shoes, and they would keep you out of the mud.
Nice. So we are seeing connections with the fashion trend we're
Absolutely.
seeing in Italy with those platform shoes. That's great
Yes.
because it banks up more of the stuff of our
Right.
Florentine
And it makes
conversations and
sense
stuff.
because Dublin, I think these were found in Dublin. Dublin was a muck fest in the
Yeah,
in the 15th
yeah,
century. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna say that medieval cities were like modern cities. They weren't. The streets were
mm,
muddy. That is not a myth. People did in fact dump the contents of their chamber pots out the window. Not a myth. Animals defecated everywhere. Not a myth. It was a truth universally known that the streets of cities were a repulsive place to exist. So
Mm.
that is not, even in the Middle Ages, they acknowledged this. This is not a Victorian. The Victorians have slandered medieval life and culture massively. This is one area where they didn't
Mm.
actually slander medieval life. Yeah.
But yeah, it's great. Yeah. Very, very muddy. And yeah. Anyway, back to the
Yeah, it
clothes. My
is
brain just
thinking
fuzzled out
about
there
this
because
season.
I got what was it? Yuki gave me the references to fringing of cloaks there and the play on language. So my brain is like fringing, and then you've got the shoes going on as well. So my brain is like shoes, fringes. Yeah, yeah, it's good.
Let's see. Did they copy the Roman system of hobnails in the bottom of the shoes? No, they did not. Yeah, so why
Mm.
guy? It's very strange. We don't know why exactly. But no, they did not. We do not have examples. I have not seen, I think I've seen one example of a pair of shoes with hobnails, but no documentary evidence of it, and all other extant shoes have no evidence of hobnails. I don't know why.
Mm.
Um, Instead, they were actually tying on overshoes called pattens. So they were either made of leather or
Mm.
wood or cork, and they would actually elevate you up out of the muck. And so instead of hobnails, they just went whole scale, whole hog for pattens. But Philip, have you done any fighting in medieval turn shoes?
Oh my God, I always have to take them off. I did for what was it, experimental archaeology, for martial arts. I have done actually, and I don't get me wrong, I've survived, but exactly as the picture, because in all the pictures, the Kerns, who are the cattle raiders, they're not wearing shoes, and so people are assuming, oh, what the Kerns are so poor and stuff. The Kerns are running around in saffron. What was it, Lena's, and these big fancy embroidered jackets, and yet people, they're not wearing any shoes, so people are like, oh well, they're poor. No, they're taking their shoes off because they don't want to slip in the slippery muddy bogs of Ireland to do their martial arts. Because what would happen is that these guys would go off to steal cattle, and then they would bump into another kern who they had a feud with, and they would duel. And if you're wearing those shoes on muddy ground trying to duel, you're going to
You're gonna
slip and
slip.
break your neck, you know. So you're not going to have to worry about dueling them or
Yeah, I
anything,
mean,
you
bare
know.
feet just gives you so much more traction, right? You can use your toes actually also much more effectively
Mm,
than if they're bound up in shoes. But in other parts of Europe,
yeah.
they didn't take their shoes off. They did fight in them. And the
Mm,
theory I have as a professional historical kinesthesiologist, I guess, is that you just learn to move differently, right? You learn that
yeah.
your balance has to be in a different place, that you have to use the front of your foot. You can't heel toe walk, you have to toe heel walk. If you've worn
Mm,
these shoes your whole life and worn them on grassy hills, muddy flats, whatever, you learn how to move differently. Modern shoes have broken us, actually.
yeah.
So yeah,
Very true. Because I'm not saying you can't do that with the shoes, because I actually have done it, and health and safety, I had to wear the
right.
shoes anyway. Because sometimes when you go to certain events, health and safety can be quite strange. And although it was more slippery and more dangerous to have the shoes on, I was made to wear them because of
Right.
health
We
and
don't we don't
safety.
want to crush your
And
feet. And it's like leather slippers are not going to stop anyone from crushing my feet.
yeah, right. But what I had to do then is do wide stance. It was literally wide stance,
Right.
wide stance, wide stance. So I wasn't tripping and falling, but it was way easier just not have the shoes on. Like, just so many options, so many jab movements I can do. I just found it very limiting, and I thought it was just easier, especially in Ireland when you're dealing with so many boggish
Right.
territory, just to take the shoes off. And I know the longbowmen in France and England as well, the English longbowmen, they were also taking off their
Right.
shoes depending on the terrain. So when they went off the beaten track, which they did a lot, there is references to them
Oh,
taking off their
interesting.
shoes as well, especially in Ireland. Yeah. So it wasn't just the current phenomenon of taking off your shoes, to use common sense. We also have English longbowmen who were looking at the terrain and thinking to themselves, okay, the shoes are coming off. I'm not doing this. And it's interesting because the longbowmen are also armed with bucklers and
Right.
swords. So they could have thought to themselves, if I suddenly have to use my feet for buckling and swording, it's better off if I take these off. I don't know how using a longbow works. Like, do you have to use a certain stance that causes you to take your shoes off as well. I don't know. I haven't used the longbow
I've only ever
to that
shot
standard.
shorter bows myself, so I couldn't say. To
Yeah.
Kate actually is a good comment. He says, amazingly, when walking in period footwear, the medieval combat manuals make so much more sense physically. Yeah. So suddenly, because you were talking about the wide stance, right? So if you look in
Yeah.
medieval combat manuals, they're very often in wide stance, if not always in a wide stance. And suddenly it makes so much more sense why you're moving that way, because you don't have a grippy rubber bouncy sole to do the work for you. There was
Yeah. I definitely agree with
do
that
we
one.
have any evidence of embroidery on indoor shoes? Yes. Depends on but why, Guy? You have to say where, because Europe is not a monolith, and also when. So we've definitely have evidence of embroidered shoes in Italy in the 15th century, and even from some earlier centuries, and even not just indoor shoes, actually. Were there medieval safety shoes for blacksmiths or glass blowers? Glass blowers are always depicted as wearing no shoes and nothing but a pretty bare tunic. So the depictions might not be accurate, but the depictions I've seen of medieval glass blowers, they're never wearing shoes.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's interesting.
that is you're like, why don't you want the molten glass to not drop on your feet? Oh, but you know what? I seem to recall them using their toes for some part of the glass blowing process. Something in my head is telling me that. I'm not a glass blowing expert, a medieval glass blowing expert. I've seen medieval glass blowers working, and I've seen some representations, but it's not really my strong suit. Blacksmiths are always shown just wearing regular leather shoes or leather boots. They're always depicted wearing an apron. Of some kind. But they, safety, I'm not certain, what would a safety shoe be using medieval materials? Like there's no, I mean, I guess maybe
I don't know.
a
Riveted mail.
sabaton a leather would be the leather
Yeah.
or the metal armor overshoe that knights wore, right, as part of their harness. Maybe that would make sense as a blacksmith to wear sabatons, but I don't think they did actually.
Just learn to
Right.
deal with it.
Oh, what sort of underpants did they sport? Okay, so Seamus, I'm going to say we're going to save that for next time. So we're actually going to be talking on our next episodes, next episode at least. We're going to be talking about underpants and kilts and probably other things at this point. We'll focus maybe on only clothing next time. I don't know. So I will say that when underpants are documented, they are made of white linen, and depending on the century, they go from being long, like knee length, kind of loose boxers. By the 15th century, they're fitted briefs, basically all across Europe, as far as I can tell. Ireland, though, seems to have not been wearing brays, at least in the 1390s, because Henry Castide, when he goes to give etiquette training to the kings of Ireland in preparation for their meeting with Richard II, he complains that they're not used to wearing linen brays, and so he has a bunch of pairs made for them so that they'll learn to wear them. So,
oh, that's so nice of him.
right? So what that tells me is they must not have been wearing them. Otherwise, he would, right? Like you don't complain about someone not wearing something and then make ones for them if they already have them and wear them.
Well, doesn't that back up the whole thing of when people are saying they're not wearing any underwear? Hey, look, only the Irish aren't
Maybe
wearing
it's the
underwear,
Irish
okay?
one, as
Just
far
make
as
that
I can
clear.
tell. It's like the one place in the medieval Europe where it's true. People didn't wear underpants, and it's Ireland.
It feeds into this whole kilt evolution, the way that they're wearing the tunic all the time that looks like a kilt when you have the belt on over it. So that's quite interesting. That perhaps maybe they were just wearing the tunic more with no underwear rather than putting pants on. But they must have, because he was saying that he went up to the O'Neill area, wasn't it?
So they they came to Dublin. They came and stayed in some rich burger's house in Dublin, right? And he spent like a month with them. Dressing them properly, teaching them etiquette, and all these in preparation for their knighting. Right, they were going to be knighted by the King of England.
Yeah.
So they all come to him. It's O'Brien and It's four kings. Kings is in quotes, by the way. He calls them kings. Yeah.
Oh, so they were staying. So these are Gaelic men that are used to living
Yeah.
in the countryside. They were staying in
They
Dublin
came
at the
to Dublin.
time, and they
Yeah.
weren't wearing. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that makes more sense. Because I was thinking to myself,
No,
Dublin
no, no, no,
people
no.
not wearing
These are four
because
kings of
yeah,
Ireland in quotes. Henry Castide's description. I can't remember. I do know who they were. I just one of them was O'Brien, and king. He calls them kings. I don't think they call themselves that. But
yeah. So the translation for king causes
right,
a lot of arguments because it's Ria, which is or I fada, but it really is, king of their land. So when they're saying king, they're saying, hey, look, this land was given to me by God Himself. That's what they mean by the
right,
word king. And so he's talking, and this is where it gets funny because then you'll have the likes of, Richard II, who's writing and saying, oh, I subjugated 150 Irish kings, like, that, this was a big deal or something, when really these are like the standard of a baron. So these are just
right,
landowners. It's just they kind of have way more rights than a regular baron in England. Like they quite literally are kings of
right,
their own land because that land belongs to them by God's
right.
given right. That's what they mean when they say the word
Aha.
ria in
Okay.
Irish. It's not king from an
Well, and
English interpretation, because when you say
so that's
king in
even more complicated because, of course, Romanesque is not the word. Romantic. In the Romance languages, the word for king is,
mm,
roi or rey, right? So all of those sound really close to ria, right? So I could see
mm,
how a French speaker, because in the 15th century, the word for
yeah,
king wasn't pronounced roi, it was pronounced rey. So I could see how this
yeah,
French speaker would come in and hear the word that
yeah,
they're using and say, oh, well, that's got to be a king, right?
yeah. You see, the problem is that too, because they're constantly arguing with their over kings or the person above them on their rights. And that's why Ireland is so kind of more division structured rather than centralized, is because you have all these landholders that are kind of like, but God gave me
Right,
this land.
right,
This is my land given by God. That's why they constantly highlight, as you said there, Ria. And it's so confusing because you have these barons running around Ireland defining themselves as God's given right. That's why they switched the word from Ria. Taoiseach becomes more, what was it called, more
mhm,
used. So by the time you get into the late medieval period, you have these Irish barons that instead of using the word Ria, this is my land given to
right,
me by God, they're saying the word Taoiseach, which is more of a play on words of I am the chieftain to my
um,
clan. So this clan, I'm the
right,
head of the clan. So that's what they use instead. So when you like the O'Donnells and stuff, when they go to court, when they're in Ireland, they're like, I'm the Ria of Donegal. That's my God given right. That's what he's saying to other Irish people. But then when he goes to the English court, he's either announcing himself as Taoiseach, I'm the head of the chieftain
right,
of the clan of the O'Donnells, or he's saying, what was it? The Earl. He is an Earl. From when he's because the thing is about O'Donnell, when he goes to Henry
mhm,
VIII's court, he's educated. He did his entire education in Dublin, and so he knows the equivalent to Ria
got
would
it.
be Earl. So he uses the word Earl instead. But that's because he's educated. He
Right, he
understands
understands
the
the actual
language much more.
equivalence of the titles. Yeah, right. And
Mm,
there's a good translator. Good for him. I'm so proud of him.
yeah,
Because translation,
yeah,
ladies and gentlemen, is not a question of taking word A this word in language A and finding the exact word in language B and just swapping them. You have to find the concept that is equivalent. Yeah, so
mm,
that's pretty fun. So guys, I've
yeah,
seen so many great questions about clothing and sleeping and cultural
mm,
things. If we didn't get to it today, please pop it under the video when it posts in the
yeah,
comments, and Philip and I will be sure to address them in a later
yeah.
session because they can no doubt be tied to medieval myth busting in our future sessions. Um, but I'm going to say that we're heading up on 4 hours.
Yeah, and I could talk all
Yeah,
night about it. And if you get me a few drinks there, I could quite literally go
yeah,
up all night. I've had this problem like a dozen times now. We'll
yeah,
continue it
yeah,
definitely next weekend because myself and Rachel also have like a ton of personal
yeah.
stuff going on as well. So it'll be handy actually to make a list, especially to do with, as you guys were saying there, the kilt. So we'll actually, do you want to focus on the kilt next week and a few
So
other bits and bobs? Underwear,
we'll pick
kilt.
up. It's funny because the next two sections of our presentation today were underwear and kilts.
Yeah.
So we'll do underwear and we'll do kilts next week, and we'll find some other egregious clothing misunderstandings to add in. So we will pick up with that next week. But I've seen some really great things in the live chat here. If we missed it though, because it's moving so quickly, you guys are asking such great questions. You guys have been awesome today. We really appreciate all of your fantastic participation, everyone. If there were questions you had and we didn't get to them, as I said, when the video posts in its respective place, please pop the question in the comments. We will be able to track them much more easily there. The live chat is hard to track once it's gone. And we will address them in future ones. So Philip, what else do you have going on this rest of this week on your channel?
Oh, tonight, actually, a lot of people were demanding actually covering the 13th century. So I'm actually covering a tiny bit of clothing, but it's mostly military perspective. That's why I was bugging you about all this stuff as well, about the 13th.
Cool. Make sure to attribute that to me, so if it's wrong, no one can come after you. They'll come after me.
No, you're not. What was it called? Added in this one. It's a lot of Braveheart bitching, because when people think of the 13th century, they think Braveheart. And guess what? Because I was covering that video game I was telling you about, it's referencing Braveheart a whole load. So although it's trying to be historically accurate, it wants to make the money. And the money is in Braveheart. Let's not mess around there. So I have done a few corrections in there and stuff. So it should be for you guys. I think it's Saturday morning for you guys. No, sorry, Sunday morning.
So
yeah, so wait, no, sorry, Saturday morning. So Saturday morning,
just so you
guys.
know, it's Saturday.
Yeah. Bit confusing there, but Saturday for you guys, and then Sunday if you're over in Australia, it will be Sunday morning. Around that whole period where you guys will get to see my video on 13th century Ireland, military, focused on the military of 13th century Ireland, mostly focused on this video game. I'm doing corrections on it, which will end up covering the whole 13th century warfare at the time. So that's coming up for this weekend. If you're jumping over to my Patreon, so I'm going to plug in here to make a bit of money, I will be covering Brian Boru, and I'll also be covering the basics of, because Brian Boru starts off with a smaller to it and then works his way up to over kingship, referring to himself as quite literally the emperor of the the Sky. I'll be covering the evolution starting from the basics all the way to the tippy top as Emperor of the Gael. So if you're interested into the rank system of Ireland in the early medieval period, in particular 10th century Ireland, and also you're into Brian Boru, the Emperor of the Gael, definitely it's a good time to pop over to my Patreon and have a look there at what I've got going on. It's 20 quid a month, so that's not bad. So you're not only just getting that class, you're getting all those classes with that as well. Next month, obviously, we're covering the High Middle Ages, so you'll get a bit of that as well. So it's a great time to jump on. Rachel, what do you have going on?
Well, tomorrow morning, my time, which is Saturday evening, everyone else's time, I have the second installation of my medieval coif making workshop, where I'm teaching people step by step how to make this charming. I should have worn this today. This charming, this charming, very quintessentially 15th century headdress. That's not on YouTube or anything, though. That's paid. So if you want to jump in on that, check out my website, thecreativecontessa.com. You can go ahead and sign up. All the workshops are being recorded, so even if you miss a session, you can catch up. Although maybe starting session 2 of 3 is not the best time to join. But I'm also working on a video on medieval rings. Because one of my channel sponsors is Armour and Castings, who made this amazing collar that actually makes some reenactors very angry when I wear it with just my kirtle. I know. Who would have thought that wearing a collar with a 15th century collar with a 15th century dress would cause so much rage, but it does. Anyway, I'm doing a video series on medieval rings and their fun uses, but also the fun stories and history from the Middle Ages that are attached to rings. For instance, did you know that rings could be used to protect you from demonic possession?
Really?
Medieval rings. Medieval people had a specific ring to protect you from demonic possession. So there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun things I learned in my research for this particular video essay. So stay tuned for that. I'm hoping actually after this to film that since I'm already dressed. And then there will be some random, then on a Sunday evening, your time, everyone in the Western Hemisphere, sort of Americas, I will, or Monday morning, Asia time, I will be doing my usual medieval sewing party where I will get dressed, show you the getting dressed process, and then we will make some cool thing together. I'll do medieval finger loop braiding. I'll sew. I'll hold forth about all this random crap floating in my head about medieval life, and we'll just have a fun party together. So yeah, I also do have a Patreon if anyone wants to check out all the extra footage, tutorials, lessons that I've included for my patrons, or channel membership on YouTube if you would like to support me financially. But Philip and I both appreciate all of you who, even if you don't support us financially, you come on our channel, you make great comments, you hit that thumbs up, and just generally join us for the party, the journey of learning that we are both on.
Oh, other than that, guys, thank you so much. Rachel, thank you for doing all the work this morning. It's always you who's doing all the background work while I chill out and do my bits and bobs. But other than that, guys, thank you so much and all the best.
Thanks, everyone. Stay creative. Have a lovely weekend.